All right, here we go. Drive time, Thursday afternoon, 6 minutes past the hour of 2 o'clock. Had a little rain earlier today, and it was a little chilly earlier today, but it's warmed up pretty nicely. We're looking at about 58 degrees, a little cloudy here in downtown Salt Lake City, Utah. Relatively nice forecast for the weekend, warming up into next week, back up into the 60s. Had a beautiful start to fall, beautiful start to November. But hello, happy Thursday. How are you? Good to have you with us on this radio program with a lot to do. My name is Spence Checketts. I host this show. Porter Larson producing and booking the program today. A lot of good guests to talk college football, a lot of good guests to talk pro football. We'll have Thursday Night Football on our radio station tonight. It will be a old school NFL rivalry featuring two teams heading in very different directions. It is the Broncos hosting the Raiders, Denver Broncos hosting the Las Vegas Raiders tonight when we say goodnight at 6. We will send it over to our coverage of Thursday Night Football to get your weekend in the NFL started out the right way here on ESPN 700. Massive college football weekend ahead. Now that we have the CFP rankings, we will talk about the important matchups this week, and we'll discuss, as a Utah fan, some of the games to keep an eye on and who you should be cheering for in order for Utah to either gain access to the Big 12 championship game or make it into the college football playoff as an at-large. Neither of those scenarios are extremely likely, but both of them are still very much on the table as a result of the Utes being ranked 13th in the initial iteration of the CFP rankings that we found out about on Tuesday nights. But a big game in the Big 12, and really one of the biggest games in history of BYU football, and I don't say that lightly, understanding the history of that proud football program and respecting all the accomplishments that they've been able to achieve over the course of a number of different decades. So a big, big game between BYU and Texas Tech. It's one of the biggest games that the Big 12 has seen in quite some time. And the conversation continues both yesterday and today throughout the course of college football media, podcasting, radio, TV, and such, about whether or not the Big 12 can get two teams in. 3 feels like pie in the sky. I'm not sure that's something we're going to see. But the committee, unlike last year, seems to value this conference in a way that a lot of people were not expecting. BYU comes in at number 7. Texas Tech rolls in at number 8. Utah rolls in at number 13. And the metrics really indicate it's those 3 and then a very, very large gap. Whether it's Cincinnati next, whoever you think it is. But this is a top-heavy conference. But guess what? So is the Big Ten. And, you know, you could even make an argument in the SEC as it depends on how you value Texas and Oklahoma. But, you know, the Big Ten top-heavy with Ohio State and Indiana. This year the SEC seems to have 3, if not 4 elite teams with A&M, Bama, Georgia, Ole Miss. And then if you throw BYU, Texas Tech, and Utah in the mix, I mean, I think 3 of the 4 P4 conferences could make an argument that they are a little bit top-heavy this year. And I don't really know how good the rest of the Big 12 is, making the rest of the way for both BYU and Utah, both fascinating and potentially carving a path to CFP entrance, whether it's Big 12 championship or at large. So we'll get to all the storylines. We'll preview BYU, Texas Tech. We'll preview the college football weekend ahead, both in the Big 12 and on a national scale as well. Still kind of reeling from the news yesterday. Walker Kessler out for the year for the Utah Jazz. First and foremost, as we talked about yesterday, just really gutted for Walker. This will cost him millions of dollars in salary, potentially moving forward. But from a Utah Jazz business standpoint, it actually isn't horrible news, as awful as that sounds. Jazz lost to a really good Detroit Piston team last night. The Eastern Conference in pro basketball is going to be pretty fascinating to watch. With no Jason Tatum, the Boston Celtics aren't who they once were. And, of course, they got rid of Drew Holiday and Al Horford and such. And Dennis Lindsey and Trajan Langdon have built a really good young team out there in Detroit. So 114-103, Yusuf Nurkic, 17 boards. He's going to be the starting center moving forward, which, you know, he's Yusuf Nurkic. So we're continuing to kind of monitor the young players. Ace Bailey, 19 minutes last night. Walter Clayton Jr. played 15. Do a little Jazz basketball, a little NBA basketball on the program today. Great to have you with us. A lot to do on the radio show with a good guest list. We'll start things off on this Thursday with one of our favorites, Kyle Bonagura, to talk a little college football. I've not had Kyle on since the CFP rankings were released. We'll talk some Utah. We'll talk some BYU. We'll talk some Big 12. And then we'll kind of discuss the overall landscape of what he thinks this 12-team CFP format will look like. And we'll talk some college football with Kyle, maybe sneak in a little U.S. men's national team as we are about 8.5 months away from the World Cup, thereabouts. Diego Luna, hopefully he'll be a lock to make Mauricio Pochettino's roster and represent the U.S. men's national team on the biggest scale that is possible. The World Cup is something that's hard for even me to comprehend. Not sure how many American sports fans really understand on a worldwide scale the interest there. RSL offseason got going yesterday with the announcement that Kurt Schmidt and Pablo Mastroeni have been extended. Kurt, as the sporting director, will report directly to Jason Kreis, who's the president of soccer ops now for both the Royals and RSL. And Pablo Mastroeni gets another couple of years after qualifying for the postseason for 5 straight seasons. It is the longest streak in all of Major League Soccer. So Richard Smith will join us to talk a little Jazz and some NBA. Smitty, a consistent weekly guest of ours. We'll bring in Matt Brown from Extra Points, one of my favorites. It's one of those interviews where I'm asking questions and then taking notes. Matt is a very smart college football media member, really leans in heavily to the business side of the sport and does a great job with his newsletter, Extra Points. I always enjoyed chatting with Matt. And then Sam Bruckhaus, Sumer Sports, as the weekend in pro football begins tonight. Hard to believe that it's week 10 in the NFL, but that's where we're at. So we'll kind of preview tonight's Thursday night football game between the Raiders and the Broncos. We'll do some trade deadline, and then we'll talk big picture NFL with Sam, of course, our friends from Handy and Handy, on a Thursday for a little sports court, as we are often wont to do. Kyle Bonagura, Richard Smith, Matt Brown, Sam Bruckhaus, little sports court, busy Thursday. Me, Spence Checketts. Hopefully you guys are having a great Thursday, almost to that weekend, and you do get a little football tonight. And that guy, Porter Larson, on this Thursday afternoon. Bye week for the Utes. Are you going to be foraging for gold? Are you going to be hiking in the mountains? You referenced before the show you're really looking hard for gold so you can quit your job.
No, not to be so direct. I'll still talk about sports, and
yeah,
if someone wants to, someone can pay
leave.
me. Someone can pay me to do it. Always looking for some sort of gold, though, aren't we?
If you find your gold, you are leaving this job the day you find it.
Well, it depends how much there is. I don't know how much is left.
Well, what if you find enough that it's generational wealth, you never have to work again? Will you at least produce the show that day? Just produce the show that day. Give me one day to find a producer.
I'll give you at least a day, maybe a week or so. I don't know. We'll see.
But what do you do during a bye week for the Utes?
Yeah, we'll get outside. It's supposed to be like one of the last weeks probably of the year above 50, 55 degrees. So we'll get outside a little bit, but yeah, nothing out of the ordinary. There's still a lot of really good football, as you mentioned. BYU, Texas Tech. I'll be glued to that a good portion of Tuesday morning and afternoon, and a bunch of good football after that, and then weekend will be over before we know it after all the football. Are
you nervous for tomorrow's Jazz T-Wolves game, as it is a cup game? It's the NBA Emirates Cup.
I'm always nervous for NBA Cup matchups, as I've always talked about. It's just it's the biggest sporting event on the calendar. I really applaud the NBA for their forward thinking in meaningful basketball on the calendar, so these guys can make more money. 3 weeks into the NBA season.
Yeah. Yep. It's
sorry, I couldn't do that earnestly.
Big weekend ahead, certainly, for the fans of the NBA, as it is the Emirates NBA Cup. All right, but we have a massive weekend in college football. We're going to bring in Kyle Bonagura right off the top to break it all down and talk some CFP rankings and scenarios for the Utes to find their way in, and some matchups this weekend to keep your eye on. But before we bring in Kyle, on a Thursday afternoon, courtesy of our good friends and your good friends too at Prize Picks, it is time now for your opening tip.
Welcome to The Drive with Spence Checketts on Utah's #1 sports talk. Now into the studios of ESPN 700 to set the scene for the show. The opening tip of The Drive is brought to you by Prize Picks. Use the code ESPN 700 and run your game with Prize Picks.
Prize Picks is the best place to win money on football. You guys already know that. Whether it is the Broncos, who play tonight, the Raiders, who play the Broncos tonight, the Jets, do not bet on the Jets. Whoever your favorite team is, it's the best place to win cash on football. But basketball is here, and Prize Picks also is the best place to win cash on hoops. They offer stacks now, one of the only platforms to do that, which means you can pick the same player up to 3 times in the same lineup if you like a matchup against the other team. Lauri Markkanen's points, rebounds, assists, stuff like that. You can pick all of them in the same lineup only on Prize Picks. You can also follow other Prize Picks players directly on the app. and copy their lineups in one click, whether it's a friend, a celebrity partner, or just someone whose picks you like. Hit the follow button and check out every lineup they create in the new feed tabs on Prize Picks. What you should do right away, though, is go get their free money. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use that promo code ESPN700 to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Promo code ESPN700 to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup, because on Prize Picks, it is good to be right. All right, University of Utah on a bye this week, as you guys are already aware. If you listen to the station, you're probably a Ute fan, so no Ute football this week, and then the stretch run is upon us. The Utes have been favored in every game they played this year, and obviously have stubbed their toe twice against two top 10 football teams in Texas Tech and BYU. And Texas Tech and BYU will do battle coming up this weekend. The line continues to really look at Texas Tech as a heavy favorite. Utah will close at Baylor and Waco, home against K-State. Then they're going to head to Kansas for a post-Thanksgiving clash. The Utes will be favored in their final three games. And we discussed this yesterday. We're going to unpack some of it with Kyle Bonagura today. The scenarios in which the University of Utah will find their way either into the Big 12 championship game or into the CFP as an at-large team are not likely, but still very much alive and on the table. And a few things, from a Ute fan perspective that manifested this week is good news. And whether you like it or not, the fact that the committee did not necessarily penalize BYU the same way some of the advanced metrics are penalizing BYU. And that's just the reality. Like, there was another power rankings released today by a data-driven college football website and analyst that just loves Texas Tech, loves Utah, and is still waiting for BYU to answer some very real questions. But the fact that BYU 8 in the AP is 7 in the CFP rankings, that's good news for Utah in a roundabout way. Same thing for Tech. I mean, again, a lot of the advanced metrics really like Tech the same way they like Utah, but don't necessarily like BYU. Texas Tech 9 in the AP, and they move up to 8 in the CFP rankings. Utah was the biggest mover, along with Iowa, juxtaposed their CFP standings to the AP rankings. They come in at 17, but move up 4 spots in the CFP rankings to number 13. Now, the interesting thing that started to manifest itself a little bit is it's pretty clear that, like the other conferences, the Big 12 is also very top-heavy. And the top 3, BYU, Texas Tech, and Utah. And then there is a really big gap when you look at the advanced metrics between Utah and whoever you believe number 3 is. Most people believe that's Cincinnati. Probably would have been Arizona State should Sam Leavitt have stayed healthy, but, of course, surgery for Sam. He is out for the year. And a lot of the other contenders that were thought to be very good teams this year haven't turned out to be very good teams. K-State, Iowa State, to name a few. I think there were a lot of people that were kind of on the Dave Aranda bandwagon early on with Baylor, but they have just been up and down. And for a defensive-minded head coach, that team has not necessarily been a dominant defensive side, and that will be Utah's next opponent on the road. But what we're going to see coming up this weekend in Lubbock is really where the focus needs to be. It's 10 a.m., BYU, Texas Tech, and it is a massive, massive matchup. It is one of the, and this is, I'm not a hyperbolic radio host, but this is one of the biggest games in the history of BYU football. I'll tell you why. Now, this is a program that has accomplished a tremendous amount in the past. A lot of WAC championships, a lot of Holiday Bowl wins back in the day for us college football fans of a certain age, and obviously the only football program in our state to win a national championship, and that's back in 1984. I do think past achievements in college football, the statute of limitations needs to include a lot of context, if not just eliminated at all. But the banner is the banner, and the accomplishment was the accomplishment. And it's hard to paint this game as anything bigger than what brings you a national championship. But obviously, back in 84, as a lot of media members pointed out, scheduling stuff, the weird way college football picked its national championship, a lot of people look at that national championship with a lot of asterisks on it. I'm not one of them, because I believe in the scoreboard. And that's why I believe BYU deserves a little bit more respect than they're receiving from a lot of people across the country that continue to have very real questions about how good this team is. But the fact of the matter is this, and this is just my opinion, whoever wins this game on Saturday morning, I think has stamped their ticket to the college football playoff. Certainly stamped their ticket to the Big 12 championship game. Now, of course, there is plenty left to do. Now, for Texas Tech, this is the final challenge of the season, They'll have 2 more games, and it's UCF at home, and it's West Virginia on the road. 2 of the 3 worst football teams in this conference, depending on how you look at Colorado. Oklahoma State clearly is at the bottom. West Virginia, UCF, Colorado, only 1 conference win. But Tech is going to roll over the final 2 weeks of the season. This is their final test. Now, the interesting thing about the BYU side of this, BYU is coming off a bye. Texas Tech has played 6 straight games, okay? So if you're BYU, you feel really good about your chances just based off of how fresh you are. They're going to get L.J. Martin back. He's one of the best backs in all of the Big 12. And it's a little bit more of a dicey finish for Brigham Young. But again, as I said earlier, all of the numbers, all of the data points, and even all of just the ability to analyze this conference, if you watch the football games, it is BYU, Texas Tech, Utah, and a Grand Canyon gap between whoever is 3 and whoever is 4. So I do believe that if BYU is able to win on Saturday, they will handle their business the rest of the way, but their challenges are a little more difficult than Texas Tech's, as they're going to take on a TCU team at home that is very much mid-tier, but not bottom tier, and a team that if they get it going, they can put some points up on you. You know, they put 42 up on Baylor. They put 35 up on SMU. They beat SMU, a team that beat Miami. Like, TCU is not a bye week. It's not West Virginia. It's not UCF, but it is in Provo, and my guess is BYU will be a healthy maybe 9-10 point favorite in that game. Then they do have to go on the road to Cincinnati, okay? And that gets a little bit interesting because, as I referenced, even though this is a top-heavy conference with the top 3, I think most people would tell you the 4th best team in this conference is Cincinnati. Now, this is recency bias, but I was up there at Rice-Eccles Stadium, and I was not impressed at all. And that was more of a testament to the current form of the Utes, and the current form of the Utes, and also more or less being as healthy as Utah football has been this time of year for maybe 4 or 5 years, is the reason these advanced metrics still value this team as potentially a top 7 or 8 team in all of college football. So Cincinnati ran into a buzzsaw. We should be clear. Cincinnati ran into a Utah team that right now has simply just figured it out. But if what I saw on Saturday of last week is any indicator of who Cincinnati is, remember, BYU football is built a lot like Utah football. At the admission of their head coach on this show a couple of months ago, when I asked Kalani, as you've built this thing up over a decade, how much of it is you, how much of it is Lavelle, how much of it is Witt? And in classic Kalani form, he credited the coach who he played for in Lavelle Edwards and the coach who he coached under in Kyle Whittingham. Jay Hill cut his teeth under Witt. And you can see it when you watch the schematics on defense and the way they like to play and how fast and physical they are on defense and their ability to run the football. I mean, even a lot of the conference metrics and numbers put BYU and Utah right next to each other on both offense and defense. That's not by accident. So if Utah can undress Cincinnati the way they did, I think BYU has a chance to do that too. And part of me actually believes the TCU game at home might be a more difficult test than the Cincinnati game on the road. Because remember, and we talked about this prior to Utah-Cincinnati, the PFF grade on Cincinnati's defensive line tells us that's the worst defensive front in the Big 12. Worse than Oklahoma State, worse than West Virginia, worse than Colorado, worse than UCF. And we saw that manifest last Saturday as Utah ran the ball down their throats. Utah's the best rushing team in the conference, but you know who's 2? That's BYU. So if Utah can out-physical Cincinnati, I think Brigham Young can as well. And then BYU's last game is a glorified bye with UCF at home. So that leads me to believe Saturday, down in Waco, Texas Tech, BYU, the winner of that game, in my opinion, stamps its ticket to the Big 12 championship game and probably the college football playoff. We'll get Kyle Bonagura's take on this coming up. He'll be our first guest. Then it's Richard Smith, Matt Brown, Sam Bruckhouse, a little sports court. Busy show on a Thursday. Keep it right here on ESPN 700. Bye week for the Utah Utes, getting ready for the stretch run. 3 games left for Utah. Utah comes in at 13 in the first iteration of the CFP rankings that were released on Tuesday night, a big one in Waco between BYU and Texas Tech. So a lot to talk about with our next guest, Kyle Bonagura, ESPN. Kyle, happy Thursday, man. How we doing?
Doing good, Spence. How are you?
Doing well. So you and I talked about this last week. Ultimately, a lot of these advanced metrics are telling us that Utah is still a really, really good football team. A lot of the metrics actually ranking Utah ahead of BYU, and some even ranking Utah ahead of Texas Tech. So that leads us to Tuesday night as we were all sitting in front of our TVs waiting for the rankings to be released. Utah at 17 in the AP, and then the rankings start rolling in on the CFP, and 17 is Tech, 16 is Vanderbilt, 15 is Louisville, and I'm going, okay, where are they going to land? 14, Virginia. 13 is where the Utah Utes landed. Were you surprised? Give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I think I was a little bit surprised just because I think I was preparing for them to be closer to where the AP had them. That's kind of the default way I went into it. So for them, it couldn't have gone much better, right? Because now you're looking at 13. And so before, I think, when we were discussing the possibility of, 2 Big 12 teams last year, I think it was probably the teams that were going to play for the title. And now you can kind of drum up a scenario where Utah just wins its last 3. They're sitting there at 10-2, don't have to worry about a conference title game, and where could they potentially wind up? They're so close to where the cutoff is going to be that they're very much part of the discussion. You could kind of come up with some scenarios where they could get in, and of course there's plenty where they don't. But it makes these last 3 games a lot more interesting from that perspective, knowing that they're nationally relevant in that way.
So BYU, on the other hand, pretty closely mirrored their AP, 8 in the AP, 7th in the college football rankings. We'll talk some big picture Big 12 in a moment. And then I do want to get your thoughts on what potentially is going to be I hope it's a good game. It's certainly a massive game. But BYU slides up 1 spot from their AP ranking juxtaposed to where they're at the CFP. Is that about what you were expecting?
Yeah, and I kind of do the exercise every week, too. I forget if I had them at 7 or 8. I might have had them at 8 because I think I had Oregon ahead of them. But for me, I think I had Oregon at 5 or 6, and everyone else was in the same order. So, yeah, 7's not totally surprising. Being undefeated, they were certainly going to be somewhere in that range. And, yeah, I think that it looks about right when you kind of round it out.
So from a big picture, if we pan back now to 30,000 feet, Texas Tech at 8, so BYU 7, Texas Tech at 8, Utah at 13. The scenarios are dizzying to go over about how Utah qualifies for the Big 12 championship game or, makes it in as an at-large. But just generally speaking, it does feel like this committee this year values the Big 12 in a way the committee last year did not. Is that fair to say?
I don't know. I wouldn't want to. Honestly, since I don't really remember how it broke down with the Big 12 last year, that especially at this point in the season, for me, it's always very individual team based, right? It's like the conference as a whole isn't necessarily reflective of the teams at the top always, and so certainly in this case, it kind of gives their projection that they value the Big 12. But for me, look, Utah's 7-2, BYU's 8-0, Texas Tech is 8-1, based on who they've played and what their records are, it made sense for them to be this high. And then you just don't see anyone else after those guys. And so the teams at the top earn their spot there. And I think going beyond that is probably too much for me to kind of, say that it's a reflection of the Big 12 as a whole more than just these teams.
Well, and to underscore your point, pretty much every data point, pretty much every metric indicates that in the Big 12 this year, there are 3 good teams, and those 3 good teams are BYU, Texas Tech, and Utah, in whatever order you'd like to rank them. I'm old school and believe in head-to-head, right? And so BYU and Texas Tech both beat the Utes. You can't get around that. But then it appears, Kyle, that there's like a Grand Canyon gap between Utah at 3 and whoever you think is 4. Most people believe it's Cincinnati. And I was up there last Saturday, and I watched Utah. And look, right now, Utah they're in great form. I mean, it's one of the reasons these current metrics are valuing Utah as high as they are. They're as healthy as they've been in a mid-November college football season in 4 or 5 years. But that didn't, like, Cincinnati rolled in as a top 25 football team, and I walked away both very impressed with Utah and a little bit disappointed at what I saw from Cincinnati. So it appears that what we have in the Big 12 isn't too dissimilar to what we have in the Big 10 with Ohio State and Indiana, or even the SEC with A&M, Bama, Georgia. I mean, I think 3 of the P4 conferences are legitimately very top-heavy. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, for sure. And you spelled it out well. Like Cincinnati's 5-1 in the league, and they didn't belong on the same field as Utah on Saturday, right? So if they're the number 4, like the margin of victory was 31 points between the supposed 3rd team and 4th team, and so I think results do matter, right? And I think like what you said too, like BYU deserves to be ranked ahead of Utah and Texas Tech right now because one, it beat Utah and it hasn't lost any games. But like if you were to put those teams on a neutral field next week, that doesn't mean that the consensus would necessarily point to BYU being the pick, right? And I think that speaks to how close these teams are. Like BYU beat Utah, therefore they deserve to be ranked ahead. But as far as like who the better team is, like next week, that's there's a debate to be had, I guess, is what I'm saying.
So that brings us to what we could see coming up this weekend, where Texas Tech and BYU are going to do battle coming up at 10 a.m. The line it continues to favor Texas Tech basically as a double-digit favorite, and I've been kind of listening to a bunch of different college football podcasts and reading a bunch of different previews here, and a lot of people do believe Texas Tech is not just going to win but cover. That's tough for me. BYU's been really, really good against the spread, coming up pretty much all season long, and that just feels like a really big line, even though this game will be played in Lubbock. Now, as you know, Texas Tech defensively, like they're the best rushing defense in the Big 12, and it's actually not close. They allow 74 yards per game, 74.6. The next best rushing defense is actually TCU, which kind of surprised me at 120. As far as what BYU wants to do on offense, they want to run the football. They're one of the top, I think they're one of the top 4 or 5 rushing teams in the Big 12. And that, to me, is where this game is going to kind of rely on. BYU does get L.J. Martin back coming up this weekend because they're coming off a bye. And that's another interesting dynamic. BYU's coming off a bye, and Texas Tech will be playing, I think this will be their 7th straight game without a bye. So what do you think we'll see in Lubbock? Texas Tech, a 10.5-point favorite, but again, BYU's been awesome against the spread all year long.
Yeah, not only has BYU been awesome against the spread, but over the last 2 years, this is not a team that has ever been blown out, right? Their 2 losses last year were both coin flips. They're undefeated this year. So to all of a sudden expect this team with that track record over a 2-year period is all of a sudden you get, lose by double digits. Yeah, I don't know. That seems like a stretch for me, right? And it's really, maybe that's me oversimplifying things and just kind of looking at scores and looking at like how they've done over a long period of time. BYU is just not a team that that they always play to whoever their competition, right? You can kind of ding them for playing close games against bad teams, but they're always in whatever game they play, and I don't think that'll be any different against Texas Tech this weekend. I mean, I love Texas Tech as a team. I think the Arizona State game was a bit of a fluke. I think at its best, Texas Tech is the best team in the Big 12 when when all things are equal. So I think Texas Tech probably should win this game. But for me, it sets up to be much closer than a 10.5 point spread, and I'm expecting it to be a game that is competitive all the way to the end.
I will not get into these Big 12 tie-breaking scenarios with you because I do not want to give you a headache on a Thursday, nor will I discuss. I'll save it, and I started the show with some of it. I'll save it for a solo segment so my listeners can turn on the radio and be like, oh, Spence is schizophrenic because he's talking about 25 different scenarios. So I'll just reduce this to a question. Does it feel like it's more likely that the Big 12 will be able to get 2 teams into the CFP today than it did last week when we spoke?
Yeah, no, I think that's clear that it's more likely than it was a week ago. And I think a lot of that is just where Utah is at, because now that you have three teams that are in the mix, the idea, and I would be interested in running like various scenarios to determine like if three could get in. I think that's probably a stretch and maybe a waste of time for me to kind of do that. But but let's game it out just for a second. So Utah wins its next three games handily. It finishes 10-2. You have Texas Tech or BYU beats Texas Tech today, and then Texas Tech returns the favor in the Big 12 title game. Then you have Utah at 10-2. Texas Tech's in virtue of being the conference champion. Then you have BYU at 11-1. I think in that scenario, definitely two teams get in. Like I just don't see an 11-1 team that at that point would have risen to maybe call it number 4 in the country, possibly. Like I just don't think they would get left out. And then if you find enough losses elsewhere, say Notre Dame loses, I think Texas and Oklahoma are quite clearly going to drop off at some point. And so there's 3 spots already, right? And you got to make way for the ACC champ and the Group of 5 champ. But maybe if Oregon loses a couple, like you could conceivably put together a scenario that results in 3. Will that happen? No. But the fact that you can kind of have that conversation, speaks volumes in terms of getting 2 teams in, right? So I think I think it looks pretty good right now for the Big 12.
Not a conspiracy theorist. I don't listen to a man whose job it was 5 years ago to try to convince humans to eat animal feces on TV for medical advice. I just usually call my doctor if I have a question. So I'm not one of those guys that lives online. That's a Joe Rogan joke. But
thanks for clarifying that.
but we do exist in this area of the country now in the Big 12 footprint where a lot of people do believe, just simply because BYU does not have the Big 10 connected to it or the SEC connected to it as an undefeated team. Why are there teams ahead of BYU that have losses when BYU does not? And there are a lot of people that believe that, there is this bias against the Big 12 and believe the Big 12, as far as football, is on par with the Big 10 and the SEC. I am not one of those people. I do think the best football in America is played in the Big 10 and in the SEC, which is why I hope at some point, certainly Utah and maybe BYU, who knows? I don't know that they're a Big 10 fit, but if you're not in the Big 10 and the SEC, you and I have discussed this, you still, in a way, are a little bit on the outside looking in. If I asked you simply, Kyle, as somebody who covers the sport and has been all over the country, to compare the quality of football, even the top teams, BYU, Texas Tech, Utah, to the top teams year after year in the Big 10 and the SEC, your reaction is what?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that over a period of time, several years, that the top of the Big Ten and the top of the SEC is different than the rest of the country. That doesn't mean there can't be a team every now and again that jumps up and plays at that level. But look, you look at every single metric you can come up with, that's the story the numbers tell. NFL players, straight up wins and losses, head-to-head results. Like any way you can kind of look at it, those conferences have just been better. Again, like that doesn't mean Utah can't go out and beat, whoever, right? Oregon, we've seen them beat Oregon a number of times when they were in the same conference, right? So like you can be at that level, but like, also you look at BYU, who's undefeated, and BYU beat Colorado by 3 points, right? And so if you're trying to make the case that this undefeated team is on par with these other undefeated teams, maybe like beat a terrible team like Colorado by more than a field goal, and that would help make your case a little bit stronger, right? I think that's the type of result you would need to see from a team in the Big 12 to convince everyone else around the country that they're on that same playing field. And look, the playoff is great for a discussion like this, because in years past you would get bowl games where maybe or maybe not people are taking it seriously, especially in the last 5, 6, 7 years or whatever. Now we're going to get meaningful data points at the end of the year to find out who is the best on the field. Arizona, I thought, showed pretty well last year in its opportunity to represent the conference, and that's really going to tell the story. If teams in the Big 12 can routinely win playoff games, I think the perception changes. Like the perception is what it is because of the results over a long period of time. And there's some biases that go into that. That's just the nature of college sports and sports in general when we're talking about who's better than someone else. But yeah, it's really, the onus is on the Big 12 to go win these games when they really matter most.
So let me ask you about Oregon, who was, I believe, the team that had the biggest fall between their AP spot, certainly in the top 20, biggest fall between their AP spot and where they find themselves in the CFP at 9. They only have one loss, and it is to what we're being told is the second best team in the country. Were you surprised that the CFP values Oregon at 9 while the AP has them at 6?
Yeah, because like even personally, I think I said just before, like I had Oregon higher, and maybe that's just bias by me, right? Being a West Coast guy and being really familiar with Oregon, and just like, hey, like they started really high. They, the loss to Indiana isn't a bad loss. That was a pretty competitive game against a team that has been routing pretty much everyone it plays. And so, yeah, kind of looking at their schedule, Oregon really doesn't have the impressive wins right now. I think the Penn State win, when it happened, you're like, oh, it was a top 5 matchup and they won on the road, and it kind of validated kind of the preseason hype about who Oregon was. But now that we know Penn State's not a good team, you kind of have to frame that win differently. And without that kind of to hang their hat on, there really isn't a great performance out there. They look sluggish against Wisconsin in their last time out. That's why kind of this week's trip to Iowa feels like hey, show us who you are. Iowa played Indiana really close as well. And so, I think the committee did it. Like when I went back and looked at it, I was like, oh, wow, why did they fall? And I did go look at the results. They really just don't have the wins this year. And they got some chances down the stretch. They got Iowa this week, and they still have SC and Washington, both of which are in the playoff rankings as well. So plenty of time for them to make their case. And again, like they'll have to prove it on the field. When does
the Heat get hot with Deion and Boulder? And maybe it's just him taking off. It's weird to think about when he took the job and how much attention was on the hire and how much progress seemed to have been made really quickly for a program that was basically dormant for a decade. But they're back to being a team that nobody is looking at as some sort of serious threat. Do you think this is a scenario where he does the calculation and maybe says, I'm not as good at this as I thought I was going to be? Or do you think the administration down there is kind of looking at him maybe with some side eyes?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I was talking about it with a colleague this week too, just kind of just wondering those same things, because I was really surprised by last year. Like I didn't think this was a serious endeavor from day one, and then they went and won 9 games. They're like, okay, well maybe he's surrounded himself by competent staff and they know what they're doing. And it turns out it was really just kind of Shedeur and Travis Hunter really buoying that thing much higher than it really was as a program. And so the drop this year has been okay. Like I don't know how you kind of bounce back from this. I mean, certainly there's NL and all that stuff that you can remake a roster, but now he's had this is year 3, right? And so if he's trending this direction, I mean, they've given up 50 points the last 2 weeks, more than 50 points the last 2 games. It doesn't. There's just no positives to take from this year in any way, and I guess I do want to be sensitive to his medical issues that he's dealing with too, and you kind of are. I think it's like natural to wonder like what sort of role all of that plays in that. I mean, he's fighting cancer in the off season. He's dealing with blood clots on the sideline. Like that's a lot, right? And so it feels like there would be a natural reason for him to walk away and be like, look, I've got my health to worry about. This isn't going well. But if you watch his press conference on Thursday or Tuesday, rather, he really doubled down in terms of wanting to be at Colorado and building a program. He's the one to fix it, or he's the one who knows how to fix it, and all of these things. He certainly didn't sound like someone who was trending towards leaving the job behind. And then as far as like the administration side, like I haven't seen anything to indicate that administration would be willing to consider making a change. I think the amount of attention and, with that money that Deion has brought to Colorado is going to buy him more time than some ordinary coach at a random school, or even if it was a different coach at Colorado, right? I think he's going to get a lot more to play with than if the situation was different and he wasn't generating all this interest and all this revenue.
What do you most attribute this what I perceive to be a pretty wild coaching carousel? I mean, very early into the season, 9 P4 schools looking for head coaches: Stanford, UCLA, Va Tech, Oklahoma State, Arkansas, Penn State, Florida, LSU, and now Auburn. Oregon State, UAB also open as well. And there are a lot of rumors about other schools potentially terminating their coach. Why do you think we are seeing this time of year? It feels new and somewhat unprecedented.
Yeah, and it's I think a lot of it is just like, hey, like, look at this school fired their coach, and then it's just like copycat, right? Like, that's just kind of the trend right now. And I don't think it's based in logic. I think it's based in emotion that, schools are, fan bases are demanding results and putting a lot of pressure on people to make a change. And like, we're all human, right? So I think these people who are in these positions to make these decisions feel that pressure, and they have the ability to act and they have the ability to kind of appease the people who are making their life difficult is what this feels like. Because, for me, you look at what James Franklin did at Penn State is just one example, right? Like, you can certainly make the case, he wasn't going to get him over the hump, but like the other side is like, are we sure that the next coach is going to meet the same level that he met over the last, 5 years when they've been one of the best teams in college football? Yeah, there was reasons for frustration, but I think Nick Saban said it really well, is like he created those expectations. So, it puts a lot of pressure on the next coach to exceed them, right? Because if you don't exceed them, then it's like, well, what are you doing? And you could certainly allow for the possibility of the next guy at any of these places, right? Like, doesn't do as well as the guy they're replacing, like LSU. They have all the advantages you could ever ask for to be successful. But it doesn't guarantee that the next guy is going to outpace what Brian Kelly has done, and he's been okay there. There's just so much money in the sport, right? We're living in a world where Vanderbilt is found a way to have a really good program now. If you're going to the SEC and the expectation is national titles, like, I don't know, like, that's the expectation everywhere, and when that's the case, not everyone can be happy. It doesn't mean like the third or fourth or fifth place team, the coach is doing a bad job. It's just like, that's how sports works, and the idea that you can just fire your coach and find someone else to magically make things a lot better is just, I don't know. It's I guess a lot of money to burn there, and as everyone always jokes now, like when I grow up, I want to be a fired college football coach because that's the best gig going right now.
Speaking of Brian Kelly, I mean, maybe his wife likes him. I've just been like stunned. It almost feels a little, I don't know. It's kind of like your buddy who you think is happily married, then he gets divorced, and then you learn like all the things after the breakup. It's kind of how relationships work. But we had Tony Pike on, who played quarterback at Cincinnati under Brian Kelly before Utah Cincinnati. And it actually didn't occur to me to ask him about Brian Kelly until he brought it up. I was like, oh, yeah, you have firsthand experience playing for him. And he said kind of the same thing that is the general sentiment with Brian Kelly, which is like, yeah, he's a really good football mind, but just kind of an ass. I don't know how else to say that. Is that just kind of consensus? I've never met the man. I've never interviewed the man. I don't know him at all. But is that just kind of the deal with him? Like a guy that certainly knows football, but maybe doesn't necessarily know how to treat human beings?
Yeah, and I haven't met him either, and I haven't spent any time around the program in a way to like speak from a place of like authority. But like, that's certainly the projection he gives off, and I don't think he would really like fight people on that either. Like, it feels like he's so cocky and so arrogant that he's like willing to just like own it in a weird way. And it just never felt like he doesn't seem like a genuine person, I guess, is also what stands out for me. No one's going to forget him going to Baton Rouge and all of a sudden, overnight developing a Southern accent, which is really okay. So for me, that was just like, there couldn't be a worse fit here culturally than a guy who is like, thinks that that's normal or like wouldn't like make people think less of him. It was just such a laughingstock moment to kind of kick off your tenure. There's like, the only way to come back from that is to win big. And then it also just calls into question like the fit there. If you're trying to recruit in that region of the country and this is who you're projecting yourself as publicly, like I have to imagine he lost a lot of respect from people right from the very start.
Kyle, good stuff as always, man. Appreciate your time today. Enjoy the weekend of the games, and we'll chat next week, okay?
All right. Sounds good, Spence. See you.
Kyle Bonagura covers college football for ESPN. You can get his work on his social media page. He also has a great podcast out called Finding Dolores, which I listened to last month. Gripping stuff at Bonagura ESPN is where you find him. All right, we've got 1 hour down. We have 3 hours to go on this Thursday afternoon. We'll catch a break, and we're going to bring in Smitty coming up on the other side of a Thursday drive. All right, show is rolling along today, and joining us live in studio once again is our good friend Melissa from Sound Sleep Medical. Melissa, how are you?
Doing well.
Thanks for the time in studio as always. Let's start with people that have trouble sleeping. What sort of health problems do they run into?
Okay, great question. If you're not sleeping well through the night, or maybe you have a snoring problem, you need to get tested and make sure it's not sleep apnea. Because if it is and you're just ignoring it, kind of letting it go, it can be linked to all sorts of health problems. Many that are very common with our society today, like high blood pressure or high blood sugar levels. Other stuff like anxiety, depression, and as you get older, even more serious things like dementia and stroke.
Now, I'm sure a lot of people have either tried a CPAP or believe that we are offering a CPAP today. We're very much not doing that. You have a non-invasive alternative to a CPAP. Let's hear about it.
Yeah, that's the good news. No CPAP at Sound Sleep Medical. We do a custom-made oral appliance. It's kind of like a mouth guard. Perfect size for you, though, that you just wear on your teeth during the night. What it will do is stabilize your airway to keep your oxygen levels up. Snoring goes away, so does your sleep apnea, and you actually wake up feeling rested.
And what's the special offer, Melissa, you have for our listeners who call you today?
Okay, call right now during the show. The number is 801-335-9824. You can also find us and schedule at soundsleepmedical.com if that's more convenient. Today with the show, it's a free sleep screening, which is the test you get to do at home in your own bed. Bring it back to us the next day or two. We'll download it, sit down, explain those results in a free sleep consultation.
But you got to call today. There's a warranty on all the devices. They're professionally fit and covered by most major medical insurances. Here's the number. Call them today. 801-335-9824. That's 801-335-9824. 801-335-9824. Online at soundsleepmedical.com. Locations in Clearfield, Murray, Sandy, American Fork, Provo, and St. George. Melissa, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Following this story down in Frisco, man, really sad. Marshawn Nealon, 24 years old, plays for the Dallas Cowboys, has passed away due to a self-inflicted gunshot. And more information is coming out that he was involved in a police chase and crashed his car, fled the scene, and shot himself. My gosh. Oof. So really sad story out of the world of the NFL. The NFL does get back in action tonight. Feels weird to go from a tragic story like that to talk about a game, but we'll say goodnight. And then it's time for the Raiders and the Broncos. The Jazz lost to a really good young Detroit Piston team last night. Walker Kessler has lost for the season. A lot to talk about with our next guest, who unfortunately I'm not looking at his handsome face today, but Richard Smith joins us via telephone. Hello, Smitty. Happy Thursday.
Spence, how we doing, man?
We're good. Let's start with the Walker news, the Walker Kessler news. You know, Smitty, it's interesting. The first storyline here, not to bury the lead, is you feel bad for Walker, and you hope that he gets back fully healthy. This does come a few weeks after the deadline came and went, where the Jazz elected not to offer him an extension on his rookie contract. So this injury could cost him millions and millions and millions of dollars. But, of course, health is the most important thing. Unpack this for us. What do you think this means for Walker? What do you think it means for the Utah Jazz?
Well, it's really a tough situation for him because the young man worked hard. They tried to get a deal done on his rookie extension this summer, early fall. Couldn't come to an agreement. So my understanding is that the Jazz decided to hold off. Now, they hold all the cards in this as far as, the future with Kessler being with the team, because he will next summer be a restricted free agent. And in contract terms, for our listeners, that simply means that Kessler and his agent will have an opportunity to shop his services around the league to anybody and solicit an offer from someone. But the Jazz will have the right of first refusal. They'll have the chance to match any offer that he gets. So they'll be in a position to decide at the end of the day, do we want to keep him or do we want to let him go based on what the numbers are looking like going forward. For Kessler, it's a tough deal because he misses this whole season to show what kind of improvement he may have made during the summer, how his game is coming along. It looked to me like he was playing very well. In the first 5 games, he was moving well. He averaged 14 and 11 with 3 assists. I mean, he's made himself, in my opinion, into a legitimate starting center and someone who can affect games on a consistent basis going forward. So now next summer he's going to turn 25. He's going to have come off a full year of not having played. He's going to be a free agent. There are still going to be teams lining up at the door because the teams are going to believe that he's getting better. And those kind of guys at 7 feet, 7'1", that can play like him, and especially around the rim, are hard to find. And so it's just going to be interesting to see what teams have some kind of feel and excitement for adding him to their team, and then whether the Jazz want to go forward and match whatever that offer might be. That's going to be the intriguing part.
When it comes to this type of injury, I never want to be the radio guy that's like, hey, I've had a shoulder problem. I'm not a young professional athlete, so it's certainly a false equivalency. But, Walker Kessler is a big, and you have to lift your arm to rebound and block shots. There is my medical analysis for you. I don't know what sort of insight you may have on this based off of your experience in the league, but what sort of danger is there with this specific injury, and what sort of kind of process will he go through to get back fully healthy?
Well, he has a torn labrum, and so it's just a matter of him rehabbing that. The surgery goes. I think he's having the surgery actually today, if I remember right. They'll put him on the usual rehab program. They'll have 28 different physiotherapists and doctors and massage therapists and strength and conditioning guys and all these kind of people monitoring his daily activity while he gets better, while he heals, gets the proper rest, and then starts strengthening it. And there shouldn't be any problem for him as long as all of that goes according to form. These things have happened with other players before. They come out of it just fine. Again, it's one of those things where you don't want to rush it. You want to make sure that he does it the right way, that the rehab is going the way they want, the strengthening is happening on incremental levels that you want to see. And as long as all that stuff goes fine, he'll be fine to go, next summer. And again, then it's going to be a matter of teams wanting to plug in a big like him, who can run the floor, who can catch on the move toward the rim, can protect the rim on the defensive end, and is a natural rebounder in traffic. And so I don't think the injury will set him back that much. I think the one thing that will hurt him is that it's hurting him from this season, showing teams what kind of improvement he's made and enticing them into believing that he can really help them in terms of offering contract numbers. But he'll have a job next year at this time with somebody. I would assume it'll be with the Jazz unless some team comes in with they consider a crazy offer and just doesn't make sense to them. I also think it's going to have an effect on how the draft plays out next spring and all those moving parts, Spence, that are hard to pin down right now. But his future in the NBA should be fine as long as the surgery and the rehab process goes along as it would be expected to be.
Yeah, you referenced the numbers this year. They've been really good. It's about 14.5 points, about 11 boards, and nearly 2 blocks. And he started to shoot some threes and actually was knocking some down. Do you think that's a portion of his game that will continue? I'm when you look at the modern day skill set of a lot of bigs, it's just a lot different than it was back in the day. We can use Big Mark as an example, who developed a nice little hook shot and was a guy that could get some putbacks, but certainly bigs back in the day. I mean, Ewing had a decent, face-up jumper and a fadeaway jumper, but bigs didn't shoot threes back in the day. A lot of them do now. Have you seen enough from Walker to believe that can be a consistent part of his game once he gets back and healthy?
Well, I think it's one of those things that they've been trying to add just to his game as a fourth or fifth option threat. I don't think it's anything where he's going to start, throwing up 8, 9, 10 threes a game, Larry Markkinen type thing. But with a big like him, he can set solid screens. He can dive, which he's shown he's been able to do, catch at the rim, finish in traffic. With this new element to his game, what he does now for an offense allows him to set screens instead of diving to the basket. Now he can step back and try and space out the middle of the floor for his teammates, assuming that his man doesn't sink down and off him to try and clog up the lane. When and if they do that, then it's an easy pitch to him. Now he's wide open, and you're not expecting him to create and take hurried shots. But his MO would eventually, I think, be just to be able to catch it. I'm wide open because my man is sagging off me. We practice this every day. I just take a nice, easy shot here, set shot for him, and hopefully can make enough to make the defense play up on him during the course of the game, and then that opens up the middle. So that's really what his threat would be going forward in that regard.
In a way, and this kind of it even makes me feel a little bit gross to say this, because you hate to talk about how a team can benefit when one of its good young players gets hurt. But is there a little serendipity here with the Jazz, who elected not to extend him, and maybe on the back end of this, the contract that, to your point, they'll probably match should Walker go out and get one like Hayward did back in the day with Charlotte, might not be as expensive as it would have prior to. And then in addition to the potential economic benefit to the team, as you and I have talked about and will discuss, and it's the same thing we talked about last year, for a team in a market that is trying to rebuild, that historically speaking has not been able to allure the top free agents year in and year out, a top 8 draft pick is a big-time asset that, in my opinion, you have to maintain as you continue to try to grow. So with Walker out, they're more likely to lose more games. And maybe even with Walker in there, they'd be one of the bottom 8 teams in the NBA. But, we did see them win some games early on. in a roundabout way, does the Walker Kessler injury actually benefit potentially the Jazz long term?
Well, that's going to be the interesting thing, right, Spence, to see how this whole thing plays out. I mean, the season's just starting. But you're exactly right. They're between a rock and a hard place when it comes to decision making and how they want to run their team. And so, are they going to try and make sure they protect that draft pick that they would have coming to them next year, that's their own? For our listeners who aren't fully aware of how this works, the Jazz several years ago traded with OKC and had a top 8 protected pick in the 2026 NBA draft included in that trade. So now that's going to come owed this next year in the draft. And so what that means is if the Jazz have one of the 8 worst records in the league, then they would get to keep that pick. And of course, because of the lottery situation, potentially have a chance to move up and maybe even pick 3-2-1 in a top-heavy draft like everybody's predicting this next year. If they have a record that's better than that, 9 through 30, if you will, in the league overall, then they would owe that pick to Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City would get the pick, and then the Jazz would have no first-round pick next year. So to your point, it's very important for them to hold on to that asset that means a lot to them in this rebuilding mode that they're in. But the players they have on the roster now, whether it's for money reasons or what have you, you've got guys like Steve Mikhailuk, you've got guys like the big guy Yusuf Nurkic, who's playing, I think, pretty well so far this year. Kevin Love has been in and out a little bit. He provides some stability, and we still haven't seen George Niang or Kyle Anderson yet, and whether they're going to be starting to play minutes when they get back injury-wise, or whether they're just going to sit on the end of the bench. We don't know that. And all those things are going to play into the development of the young guys and how they're used during the course of the season, or if the team starts trying to, quote, win games, by having veteran guys in lineups down the closing stretch of close games. All those things are going to be fascinating to watch because it's going to give the fans an interesting look into what the team is thinking, what the organization is thinking about how they view this group of players going forward.
Wonder what you make of the way Will is kind of allowing Ace Bailey to ease into his life as a pro basketball player. Before the season started, Cooper Flagg was the runaway in Vegas as far as the favorite for Rookie of the Year. I think Ace was third after the Harper kid who's in San Antonio, because during the preseason, Ace was starting and playing a lot of minutes. He played almost 40 against San Antonio, played over 30 against Houston. But his minute distribution, he's only played over 20 minutes twice. He was sick prior to opening day, but he actually played 20 minutes against the Clips. The numbers don't stand out at all, but of course he's not playing a ton. And I anticipated that he would start and maybe they'd throw him in the deep end. But do you kind of like that Will is allowing him to ease his way into his pro basketball career? Are you surprised that we're not seeing Ace starting and playing more minutes so far?
Yeah, well, a little bit of both, Spence. I thought the same. I thought he would play more because I thought they would say, "Hey, we got a top 5 pick. We got to throw him out there. We're not trying to win a championship this year or contending for any top level in the playoff race." And so we got a young guy here. We obviously value him because we picked him number 5 in the draft. So we're going to throw him out there 30, 32 minutes and let him get his feet under him and all of that. That hasn't happened so far. Could happen as the season unfolds. And, again, they have a lot of other young guys that they're still trying to figure out who they are. The George kid is getting a lot of minutes and a lot of time still at the point guard position. A lot because the Collier kid is out. They have Taylor Hendricks, who ironically had an injury of his own almost a year ago to the day that Walker Kessler was ruled out for the year. So they've had a tough break in back-to-back years with young guys that they got that they thought they were going to be part of their building process. And so that puts you back in terms of how you look at the hierarchy of your roster and who's going to get minutes and who's going to get the meaningful time as the season goes on. But I'm a little bit surprised he's not playing a little bit more. He also looks like to me like he's got some gas in that tank that he can give you in some games in terms of his athleticism and his nose for the ball. But it's coming slow, but that's okay. Sometimes, hey, those guys also may end up spending some time in the G League to get some run and to get more minutes, free-flowing minutes and get more confidence and that kind of thing. That's all part of that process, Spence. And again, because they're not really, quote, interested in winning games at the moment at any meaningful level, they've got time to nitpick around with their roster and try and figure out who they want to get in games and who they want to see with those minutes.
Yeah, and it makes it hard to. I mean, I don't want to do like a Keontae George update with you every single week. Like it's just. Well, I mean, look, I just really wish they were serious about competing, and I think a lot of Jazz fans are nervous that this is going to be a perpetual rebuild. Where, and you and I have discussed this. You were part of a front office that spoiled all of us. We're used to watching Jazz basketball that's highly competitive, and in the times where it wasn't, for whatever reason, you guys were able to get it back really quickly. Within a couple of years. And yes, you need some luck on your side, and you need a Dennis Lindsey to identify a Donovan Mitchell, and you need a Donovan Mitchell to burst right away out of the scenes and suddenly blow everybody's minds. You need a Darren Williams and a Carlos Boozer. You need to piece together things incrementally in a way where luck is part of it. But what do you make of this is year 4? They're unserious about competing again in year 4. I don't think you guys ever went 4 years between really competitive teams. Like if we pan back, what do you make of the project so far? And when are we going to see a team that's serious about competing at a high level?
Well, that's what it looks like is and again, not being in the room, I don't know, obviously everything that's going on in terms of their long-term strategy. It appears as if what they've really done is put most, if not all of their eggs in the draft bucket, and decided that we're just going to have a whole bunch of draft picks, and we're just going to keep taking young guys every year in the draft, and we hope that somewhere along the way we get lucky, with a couple picks that we hit on. Maybe the Bailey kid is one. I think it's way too early to tell that. His career is just starting. They thought maybe something with Taylor Hendricks might be something like that. But then he got hurt last year, so now that put him behind a whole year. The George kid, I think, is still in my mind is going to be a scorer type guy. I don't think he's a point guard, but they got him playing point guard. He has some nice numbers, okay, but he has nice numbers on a losing team. Not sure he's the kind of guy you want running your team up top as your lead guard on a team that's going to be competitive or is going to be winning games down the road. But those kind of guys, they're trying to flesh out. They're trying to figure out if they can find a guy somewhere along the line. Maybe he's on the roster now. Maybe he's not. When I was involved with the Jazz, we had a critical time in 05, 06, where we turned the team over after Stockton and Malone both left in the same summer, and we were fortunate. We had a bunch of money because of John and Carl leaving, and it just happened that summer that we were able to get in on and be able to convince both Carlos Boozer and the Meadow Core that this is a place where they could thrive and their careers could flourish. They're both young guys. They both wanted the opportunity to play big minutes on a team that was rolling over, so to speak, and they came in. And then the next year, we had moved up from 6 to 3 in the draft to get Darren Williams, and all of a sudden that team, next thing you know, they're in the Western Conference Finals and had a good young core along with Andre Kirilenko. and rebuilt it very quickly. And then, of course, when those guys went on and it didn't last as long as we had all hoped it would, then Dennis Lindsey came in and we were able to pair Gordon Hayward with get a young Rudy Gobert at 27, and he developed better than we thought he would. That's fair to say. And then Donovan Mitchell, we were able to get at 13, and he came out of the blocks much quicker than we thought he would. And so we were the team was the recipient of that good fortune. And you have to have that kind of thing happen along the way. So the current Jazz group, the front office, the ownership group, they're trying to figure out a way to do that. Hasn't clicked yet. It's going to be a matter of time, I think, before the fans start getting a little jittery about, what are we doing? How long is this going to take? They've got to have some form of hope that somebody's on the horizon that's going to lead them, in that positive direction. So far, they haven't found it. Okay. They're still going through the weeds, trying to figure that out now with Austin Ainge on board as the lead basketball decision maker. Maybe we see a difference in approach or difference in philosophy. That remains to be seen, but it certainly is a tough task that they have going forward because it's a tough Western Conference, and it doesn't look like anybody near the top half of the conference is giving up that type of territory anytime soon.
Smitty, before I say you lose, moving off the Jazz, once upon a time, I don't know, 4 years ago or so, I felt like Ja Morant was a talent that put Memphis on a level with teams like, Dallas with Luka, who's now who's now in Los Angeles. He was, as the kids would say, box office, really fun to watch. But beyond that, he appeared to be like this emerging talent that could be the face of the league for a minute and have everything that you want in the modern NBA with a lead guard with that length, athleticism. And, he's never been an awesome three-point shooter, but he was making inroads in that direction. And now we find ourselves with yet another suspension, and I've lost track of how many issues he's run into. I was surprised Memphis moved on from Taylor Jenkins, who I thought was a really good coach. I don't know much about this Iasolo dude, Tomas Iasolo, but I guess he and Ja get into it after the Laker loss, and, they suspend him for a game, and they lost the other night, and he was simply asked, are you enjoying playing basketball? And he said no. It only takes one team, and he's talented enough that I'm sure there would be interest, but does this feel like it's now untenable? Do you think Memphis has to figure something else out?
Well, it's going to be interesting. His current attitude and his responses in recent days in those kind of interviews have led you to feel like, oh, here comes the next Jimmy Butler saga from last year in Miami, where he was doing great. He was their guy. He was leading them in playoffs and tough games and all that. And then he got into it and didn't like the way that he was being treated internally for whatever the reason. And all of a sudden it flipped on a dime. And now he doesn't like the Miami Heat. And now he wants out. And he got into it with Pat Riley. He's the wrong guy to get into it because you're never going to win that battle. And so as we saw what happened, is he eventually moved on now in Golden State. It feels like it's that kind of a thing with Morant. You're exactly right. A few years ago, he was one of the young studs, capable of being one of the lead guys in the league. He had has all the athleticism, the ability. His issue, in my opinion, being 2,000 miles away and not being there every day, it seems like his head has gotten in the way of his game, and he's developed an attitude that he's bigger than the program. That's what it looks like to me. And in Miami, that seemed like that's what was happening with Jimmy Butler. He was in line with them for a long time, and then all of a sudden, the next day, he was out of line and didn't want to be part of it. And all of a sudden, head started knocking, and we saw what happened with that. This feels like it could be a similar type thing. The issue is going to be his money, because you're going to have to, if they want to move on from him, they're going to have to get some team that can afford to take or flip a guy who's making similar money in the neighborhood of $40 million a year. So you're gonna that's not a very long list of guys that you'd have to trade money dollar for dollar for. You have to find a team that wants him, that believes that they can deal with him. And let me tell you, Spence, a lot of teams always believe that they have the way of handling the guy. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it takes a special head coach who's in place. Sometimes it takes a special, another player, superstar player, like a LeBron James, like a Steph Curry, whoever it is, to let you know this is how we do things here. And if you come in on board with us, this is the way it's going to be. Those things, are going to be something that Memphis has to figure out if they're going to be able to work this long term. Because he's supposedly very tight with Jaren Jackson, who's their other star player, who was also just given a massive extension this past summer. So he doesn't look like he's going anywhere. So can Jaren Jackson interfere and talk to his guy and say, hey, come on, man, we got too good of a thing going. We got to figure this out, whatever, with the coach who's bringing in an unorthodox system that the players have somewhat been balking at. And so that may be part of it. It could also be a Cleveland Cavaliers thing from years ago where they brought in another European coach to coach the Cavs, and that worked out for one short year, and they jettisoned him because it just didn't jive with how he was coaching an NBA team in that regard. And so there's a lot of those things that have to be fleshed out. But I can tell you the owners for Memphis are very concerned because this is their star guy. This is the guy they've hinged a lot of their marketing, a lot of their ticket buying, sponsorships, all that stuff to his genius as a basketball talent. And now he's starting to buck the system a little bit like Allen Iverson in Philadelphia. He's not Allen Iverson, but he's maybe, half a step below that sphere. And if that's the kind of stuff you're dealing with, that's a lot of heavy lifting for an organization.
Smitty, I appreciate the time. I look forward to getting you back in studio. Have a good weekend, okay?
Hi, Spence. Thanks, man.
All right. Matt Brown joins us coming up on the other side of a quick break. All right, show rolling along today. Once again, Melissa, Sound Sleep Medical, live in the studio. Hello, Melissa. How are you?
Doing great.
All right. We are helping people who have trouble sleeping at night. What are some early signs that people could look for to indicate they might have sleep apnea?
Good question. Really common ones are I'm tired during the day. I just want to go back to bed after I wake up. Or maybe you're snoring, a morning headache, or you just don't sleep well through the night, like you're waking up too much. All of those are big red flags for sleep apnea, but the only way to know for sure is to test. And that's the great news is we're offering a test that you get to do at home in your own bed, totally free.
I have some friends that have tried the CPAP, and it's just big and bulky. It's hard to travel with. It's somewhat inconvenient. So we are not offering a CPAP today. It's an alternative. Tell us about it.
Yeah, this is a custom-made oral appliance. It's kind of like a mouth guard that you wear on your teeth just during the night. If you've tried something online, this is nothing compared to that. We call those boil and bites at our office. This is a real medical device, FDA approved, studied to work, obviously. And the great news is it can go through your health insurance. And Spence, this time of year, a lot of us are meeting our deductibles, so it's a really good time to take advantage.
And every time you're in studio, you have an offer for our listeners. What's that special offer today, Melissa?
For sure. Call now, 801-335-9824. You can also find us and schedule at soundsleepmedical.com. Do it now during the show. Don't procrastinate because we're giving you a free sleep screening, which is a test you get to do in your own bed. Bring it back to us. We've got 6 offices. We'll download it, give you that report, those results, totally free, no obligation.
Yeah, if you're sick of being tired during the day, let's get you some enhanced daytime function. There's a warranty on all these devices. They're professionally fit. And as Melissa mentioned, they're covered by most major medical insurances. But you have to call today for the free sleep screening at 801-335-9824. That's 801-335-9824, 801-335-9824, or online at soundsleepmedical.com. Locations: Clearfield, Murray, Sandy, American Fork, Provo, and St. George. Melissa, thanks so much.
Thank you.
We got Thursday Night Football on our radio station tonight. We are your home of the NFL in the market and the biggest and best college football games as well. The Raiders are in Denver to take on the Broncos. Old school NFL rivalry. Two teams headed in very different directions. We'll do some NFL with Sam Bruckhouse today. But let's welcome in one of my favorites. It is that time of year where I ask a question and start taking notes because Professor Matt Brown from Extra Points on a Thursday. Matt, how are you, sir?
Hey, I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me back.
Are you technically a professor or do you just talk like one?
I did actually teach 2 college classes today at UMass, but I do not have an advanced degree.
Okay.
So I can't actually be a professor. That was my mom.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, I appreciate your time. Right off the top, Do schools in the Big 12 drink more alcohol than BYU drinks more soda and chocolate milk?
By a lot. I was surprised, and I'll break some news here on the air. The feedback that I got on the very small sample size of booze sales was so great that then that afternoon I blocked off 3.5 hours and sent a follow-up request for updated data for everybody in FBS and FCS, because I think a number of people said, hey, you know who drinks almost as much as Nebraskans and Wisconsinites are our friends in North and South Dakota, and you need to be able to go get that information too. What I can tell you is that the soda and chocolate milk data that somebody at BYU shared with me is substantially below, I think, every other Power 4 school's beer and wine and cocktail data that I got in the data set. The joke, as I understand it, about BYU, they used to say about when they play in the Vegas Bowl, was that all the BYU fans would go to Vegas with a copy of the 10 Commandments and a $50 bill, and they wouldn't break either.
Yeah.
I think there might be a little bit of that with the concessions. For as much as we know that this market loves sugary beverages, I suspect they love thrift even more.
Yeah, that's an old Lavelle Edwards quote, which is hilarious just for our listeners that might be upset. Lavelle Edwards said that, okay? So everybody understand that was your legend making that comment. It's such an interesting topic. What motive? So for our listeners that might be confused as to why I'm asking you this, you wrote on this. What's the origin story here? Why did you decide to dig into these numbers?
So the honest to God reason, like I did not do this to try and create an online public drunkenness war between Tennessee and Nebraska and Wisconsin fans. I did this because so much of what I cover at Extra Points concerns revenue generation, how schools are earning money, how they're spending money, what are they trying to do to bring in more money. And this is a conversation that I know happens at Utah and it happens all over the country. Part of that conversation is around what can we do to better improve game day revenue and the proverbial game day experience. Most places now sell beer, which wasn't the case at the beginning of my career. And I wanted to get some ballpark figures for how much money are we talking about here, especially given that once you start selling alcohol, you generally have to have more security guards and you pay different insurance and things move around. And so the data that I got showed that Nebraska and Tennessee and West Virginia and LSU were all near the very top. And then some MAC schools and some New England institutions near the bottom. I texted some folks I knew at BYU to try to go to see if their consumption patterns were similar.
Strictly out of curiosity, were you able to get like a breakdown of how much the beverage sales down in Provo are either chocolate milk or soda? Do you have like a comparison between the two?
So the data that I have, like nobody would share dollar amounts, as you know, and I'm sure many of our listeners know. Trying to get financial information out of anything that's tied into the church is not easy to do. But my people said, all right, here's the number of chocolate milks. I want to say the average chocolate milk consumption per home game this year is around 1,300. Here's the number of like bottled sodas, and here's the number of like refillable soda cups that we have sold. And that I think has to be the issue, because if you have a family of 6, yeah, you could buy 1 or 2 cups and kind of pass that around a little bit if you wanted to save some money, which is not something that other institutions do.
Were you able to uncover any data on Cougar tail sales?
No, and I think spoiler, I think I may do that in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Because as part of the follow-up that I'm doing here on alcohol sales across all of the country, as kind of a different benchmark, I've also asked everybody to send me their hot dog sale data. Because I was trying to think of like what's a concession item that literally everybody sells. And you know, everyone's deals are a little bit different, but like you can't go to a football game in this country and not get a hot dog. So I'm going to get that. I should try to get some Cougar tail information. And then, you know, just like make sure that we don't tell whoever the Surgeon General of Utah is about what kind of a caloric explosion is happening down south. Whatever that number is, I'm sure it's going to give some doctors some chagrin.
I absolutely love that we're talking about this. It's hilarious to me, but it's one of the reasons that I really enjoy your work up at Extra Points. So here in Salt Lake at Rice Eccles, they sell beer for concerts. They do not sell beer for Utah football games, which I always got a kick. Like it felt like for 6 or 7 years, BYU fans would come to Salt Lake and then be like, yeah, they were pouring beer all over me. I'm like, well, no, they weren't, because they don't sell beer. And if you're going to sneak something into Rice Eccles, it'll probably be whiskey, but not beer. But anyway, moving aside from that, based off of your data and what you've kind of uncovered, does it feel like college football programs are leaving a tremendous amount of revenue on the table by not selling beer at their games?
I think unquestionably, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they should do it, right? Mm-hmm. So it was interesting. I had a long conversation with folks at Wisconsin about this over the off season, and I say this with love. Wisconsin is probably the state in this country that has the most developed drinking culture, and it would make sense that you would sell beverages there. But they had just started doing it throughout the concourse, and the reason was because the stadium was so daggone old. There was no place to fit in taps, and they didn't want to start selling bottled beer until they can make sure they had enough bathrooms. So sometimes, even if you might be able to generate, $200,000, $300,000 in alcohol revenue, if you don't have the infrastructure to support that, yeah, it probably does make sense not to do it. The biggest reason that I have heard, and I do think the preliminary data kind of bears this out in most markets, is that it's actually a positive public safety move. Because if people feel like they can buy alcohol inside the building, then they become less likely to smuggle it in themselves and maybe engage in more problematic drinking behavior, or feel like you have to get absolutely loaded in the parking lot before you come in. How much of an issue this is, I think, is going to depend on the market. I don't know if I could speculate who the drunkest place is going to be. But this is, I know, a sore spot among many fan bases. This is something that comes up with Iowa State fans in the Big 12 a lot. I want to say Kansas State does not have a very widespread alcohol sale within their stadium. You definitely will generate more revenue if you do that. Whether it makes sense for your stadium, your fan base, and your donors, it's a different question.
Yeah, and I believe it's a state law that is in place that does not allow Utah to sell beer during its football games. Like I said, Rice Eccles has concerts where they're going to sell beer.
Sure.
And maybe
that
you
might
do,
be true.
Yeah, and maybe you don't have information on this, but you kind of alluded to the logistics that you have to put in place when you make the decision to move into the space of selling beer, alcohol during a college football game. What does that look like? Let's just play a hypothetical. Let's say Taylor Randall, president of the U, Mark Harlan, athletic director, see Extra Points and see a few $1 million potentially left on the table, and they say, okay, we want to sell beer at Utah football games. What sort of red tape would they have to traverse?
Well, I think one, to your point, Utah, as I understand it, tends to have more draconian alcohol rules than almost anywhere else in the country.
That is correct.
So, yeah, right. You're going to have to go check to see, all right, if we're going to sell alcohol, do we have to do that weird curtain thing? Do we have to have it of a certain ABV? Like, what do we have to do to make Governor Cox feel good about this decision? You have to do all of that. And then you have to sit down and with your risk management team and your operations crew and figure out, okay, if we're going to start doing this, where in the stadium can we sell beer? Because what we don't want is to only have two places where you can do it, have a gigantic line, creates a choke point, causes problems, when you're navigating around the stadium. You have to make sure that you have enough bathrooms, and you're going to need to get more bathrooms because if people drink beer, they have to pee more often. And so you have to make sure that that even if you have to set up temporary facilities throughout the stadium so you don't have those kind of issues. And then you have the security and the insurance and the rest of the personnel in and around the stadium to make sure that you could do this in an orderly way. And a pretty common way to kind of do it as a dry run is to just sell beer and cocktails in your premium seating sections as a start, and then begin to kind of spread out from there. Once you figure out, okay, we can handle 400 very drunk rich people. Now let's see if we can handle 47,000, 52,000 other people. Not, of course, not like everyone at a Utah game is going to be drinking anyway.
Right.
It'll be a different thing. When I started my career doing this, it was pretty unusual for college stadiums to sell alcohol unless they played in a professional stadium. And it was really a lot of, Pacific, West Coast schools and like South Louisiana kind of places that were doing this. But it's kind of spread across the country. And I think people are realizing you can definitely manage this risk, and having, some Modelo's does not necessarily turn your stadium into some kind of bacchanal. Especially if you have security and you educate your fans about what is and isn't acceptable. I don't think it's really an issue very many places now.
Was there ever, and because you just referenced when you started doing this, it was pretty rare. Was there ever an NCAA, kind of countrywide rule that nobody was allowed to do it, or why has there been a change as far as the number of schools that are now doing it compared to when you kind of started covering the sport?
I'll give you an example. I don't know if I said that on the air here before, but like one of my very early professional writing gigs, around 2009. I was covering a college baseball game at the University of New Orleans. I had a day job then, and I would stringer kind of at night in and around New Orleans events. And at this baseball game, and UNO had a decent program back then, they had a Foamer homer. And if somebody hit a home run during the Foamer homer, everybody in the stadium got a free beer. And that included the press box. I mean, it was like a 6-8 ounce Coors Light cup, right? So it's basically just bread water. But they would bring it out to everybody, and nobody died, right? but that's New Orleans. That's a place that has a very different attitude about alcohol than lots of other places. But what has changed so much, I think, has not so much been an NCAA rule over the last 15 years, as it's been a crushing need for athletic departments everywhere to generate more revenue, and I think a generally more permissive attitude about all kinds of things that in the 90s or early 2000s, or maybe when you and I were first starting this business, that would have been thought of as like unheard of. We could never do this in college sports. And whether that's now with explicit gambling ties, whether that's now with potentially private equity, whether that's not just selling alcohol, but allowing alcohol companies or casinos or sin industries to advertise in your stadium. I mean, at Louisville, you can even buy like a CBD drink, in the stadium while you're watching. And the idea of doing that 10 years ago, especially in like Kentucky, would have been ludicrous. I wrote about this, I think, last week, and I'm not saying this to be like a troll or provocative or anything. I think the industry has changed so much that it's really difficult to think of a kind of activation or marketing plan that would be so offensive that schools wouldn't do it. In a couple of markets, maybe firearms, certainly adult entertainment, and that's really about it. I don't think that was the case when we started.
Interesting you bring up, because I wanted to move over into the space of, allowing college athletes to bet on pro sports now. And it's certainly a dynamic that Adam Silver has had to deal with this year with the Chauncey Billups situation, coaching one night and then arrested at 6 a.m. in his house the next morning, and Terry Rozier from the Miami Heat. So, look, I think, and look, I'm not a pearl clutcher on many things. When it comes to this trend in society, I don't see it ending well at all. I believe in the UK, they had to put a lot of regulations on betting, on English football, on the Premiership, because of all the chaos it was causing societally. The toothpaste is out of the tube, and I think it was The Athletic who did a piece indicating 70% of college males have a betting app on their phone that they're actively using. Their frat bro suddenly hits a $20,000 parlay, and they're like, okay, well, if Broccoli Rob can do it, Office reference, then I can do it too, obviously. But do you think it's a good idea to allow these college athletes to bet on pro sports?
This is a really good question. And if you had asked me that question like 3 weeks ago, I would have told you, honestly, it's probably yes. And not because I think that gambling is like a societal good. I'm with you. I think this is one of the handful of things where I think I've become more of a Puritan over the last little while. But my initial thought was, if 70% of college men have this app on their phone, and only a tiny handful of college athletes could potentially have any kind of inside information or connection to a pro player and use that to gain an advantage, it seems like it's silly to ban this because there's no possible way to enforce that rule. No one wants to penalize a third of their roster because they put $15 on the Super Bowl. So we should change the rule. So we're only going to enforce the most malignant of examples, and be reasonable with what's within our control. And then I talked to Gene Taylor about this, who's the AD at Kansas State, and is not a guy that I think is super prone to, hyperbole or public outbursts or anything. And he was quite against the NCAA making this change to allow athletes to bet. And what he told me was, look, if you're a power school, you can afford to pay for the gaming integrity services that can stop this sort of thing and catch it much easier than maybe I had originally thought. The biggest worry that I have about this world is less about college athletes betting on pro sports, or less about the NBA scandal, because I do think a lot of that isn't totally analogous to what happens here in college. But what I would be worried about, I don't think there's a good solution to this, are people within the trusted network of a college athlete, either asking for the athlete to shave some points or throw a prop bet so that guy can win money to go help his extended unit, or if he's being blackmailed or forced into participating into one of these schemes, which is kind of what happened within the NBA. And that I don't think there's a good solution to here. The college sports ecosystem, I think, is way more vulnerable to gambling-related problems than fans and even some administrators, I think, want to admit. But it's not like Charlie Baker or any of these ADs can ban gambling. If we could, I would honestly, that would be what I would prefer. What happened is we go back to how it used to be, where you could gamble in Atlantic City, Vegas, or you'd have to go somewhere that felt like societally skeezy and make you think that you were doing something that was a little bit antisocial. Now it's so ubiquitous. I don't think a lot of the low and mid-major programs are really capable of dealing with what's been unleashed.
That's a really good point about the inner circle of athletes, unfortunately. And to your point, there's nothing you can do about that. Yeah, that's an angle I hadn't really considered. I want to move over here, Matt. We talked a little bit earlier about this with Kyle Bonnegar from ESPN. As of now, 9 Power 4 schools are looking for head coaches: Stanford, UCLA, Vatech, Oklahoma State, Arkansas, Penn State, Florida, LSU, and now Auburn. What do you attribute this to? Why are we seeing this? And some of these are marquee, like top tier jobs. And it feels like this is very early in the calendar to have this many jobs open. Why do you think we're dealing with this in college football?
I think part of that is because last year's cycle was uncommonly slow. I'm trying to remember. I think the biggest job that opened last year was probably UNC, which didn't exactly go through like a typical open hiring process. So if you had a few schools that were thinking, we could be justified in firing our coach, but let's throw in some money to NIL. Let's kind of roll the dice one more year. See, have the buyout go down a little bit. So you have that world. But I think one of the other dynamics, and it's hard for me to kind of talk about this without sounding like some kind of like political crank, but I think the honest to God truth here is the buyouts for P4 coaches are not really paid for most of the time by the kind of people that buy season tickets, the kind of people that you and I might consider to be like conventionally rich. Right? Like somebody who makes $175,000 a year and lives in a nice Salt Lake suburb and gives money to the University of Utah is an important donor, but and somebody that the university needs to continue to court. But if you hypothetically had to come up with $22 million to buy out a coach, there's like 3 guys, and the kinds of places where you're fishing for that kind of money, they're so rich that they're insulated from a lot of the other forces that you and I and even our wealthier neighbors or colleagues face. And if somebody who can write a $40 million check and not blink wants to change the football coach, and you see fan attendance begin to decline and interest begin to decline, every incentive within an athletic department points to doing that thing. And it's this very surreal kind of way of writing the story every year, because almost everybody acknowledges that the economics of this entire market are broken and dumb. And we thought that there would be a reason for this to kind of claw back a little bit now that schools have to directly pay athletes and some of the revenue should be floating away. I even wrote about this, I think, a couple of days ago, how I believe that in this context, money isn't real because there's just enough hyper-rich people who aren't anywhere near that donor fatigue breaking point when it comes to seeing their favorite college football team win. I guess we're closer to the English Premier League oligarch model than maybe I thought.
Matt, great stuff as always, my man. Where can people go find your work?
You can go find my serious professional reporting on hot dogs, beer sales, conference realignment, video game news, and all that stuff at extrapointsmb.com.
Thanks, buddy. Have a great weekend, okay?
Of course. You too. You too. Be well.
All right, Matt Brown, I'm telling you, I have subscribed to that newsletter for years. It is wildly entertaining. Extra Points. And the other thing, I mean, he's tongue-in-cheek about his current reporting about juxtaposing BYU's chocolate milk consumption to Wisconsin's beer consumption. But it's a really phenomenal newsletter to understand the current landscape of the business of college football. He wrote a piece after July 1st, after the House v. NCAA settlement, that made it very digestible to understand the landscape and how it shifted that day. Extrapoints.com. Great guest. Really good dude. Always appreciate Matt's time. All right, 2 hours down, 2 hours to go. Thursday night football comes your way when we say goodnight. It is a old school NFL rivalry between two teams moving in two very different directions, the Broncos and the Raiders. We'll do some pro football coming up with Sam Bruckhouse, so keep it right here on ESPN 700. Once again, as the show rolls along, Melissa from Sound Sleep Medical joins us live in studio. Hello, Melissa. How are you?
Doing great.
All right, so we are helping people that might be suffering from sleep apnea. Let's start with the process that you're offering this for free. But what is the sleep screening? What exactly is it? How does it work?
Okay, really good question. What you'll do is swing by one of our offices. We have 6. You'll pick up a little kit of equipment to take to your own bed, your own pillow. It involves a strap around your chest to measure things like your heart rate, a pulse oximeter on your finger, and then a little cannula to measure breathing that goes up to your nose. This is at home in your own bed, but it is a full comprehensive sleep screening. And it's free. You know, a lot of people haven't done a sleep screening because they're expensive, 1, and 2, they don't want to go to a hospital or a lab and sleep somewhere strange where people are kind of watching them. This is a great way to get it done. And frankly, if you're 40 and over and you've never done a sleep screening, you're kind of late to the game. What
are the benefits that you've seen from your clients who have gone through the sleep screening and utilized this non-invasive alternative to a CPAP? What sort of benefits do they see?
Okay, so immediate benefits, Spence, would be just they feel so much better when they wake up. You know, it's hard to be tired all day long. They wake up, they actually feel good. They've got the energy to kind of engage in their relationships and their jobs, more like mental clarity. It helps with focus and concentration. And then it's just really important to treat it because there's long-term health issues that can be linked to apnea.
And as I referenced, this is not a CPAP, so tell us what it is.
Yeah, this is a custom-made oral appliance. It's just a mouth guard you wear, but it's the perfect size, perfect fit for you. We're going to do a 3D digital image of your teeth. Real, legit medical device that can go through your health insurance. If you've met your deductible or if you have HSA, FSA you need to spend, take advantage. Get in. See us now. Don't push it to the end of the year.
And what's the special offer you have for our listeners who give you a call today?
Okay, the number to call, 801-335-9824. If it's more convenient, go online. You can find us at soundsleepmedical.com. Schedule an appointment there. But we're offering a free sleep screening, so this is the test you get to do at home. Bring it back to us. We'll download it, give you that report in a consultation with one of our sleep specialists. Also free, completely no obligation.
But you got to call today, so take advantage of the offer and pick up the phone and dial 801-335-9824. That's 801-335-9824, 801-335-9824, or online at soundsleepmedical.com. Locations Clearfield, Murray, Sandy, American Fork, Provo, and St. George. Melissa, thanks so much.
Thanks.
Couple hours away from the start of Week 10 in the NFL. Hard to believe that it's actually Week 10, but here we are. We have the Broncos and the Raiders. It is an old school NFL rivalry between two teams moving in two very different directions. Our next guest, weekly conversation with the great Sam Bruckhouse from Sumer Sports. Hello, Sam. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing fantastic.
We had Lindsay on yesterday. We had Lindsay Rhodes on yesterday. She is a fountain of knowledge. What's it like working with her? You guys must have some good chemistry.
Yeah, look, Lindsay is the consummate professional and has been an excellent mentor for me in my career. She's seen it all, and as a result, she's such a wealth of knowledge and brings such great perspective. And I think her experience and her analytical view on things kind of contrast my playing experience and my analytical view on things. So check out the Sumer Sports Show with me and Lindsay every Wednesday. Next week we'll be doing our Midway All-Pro team, and so I'll be crunching those numbers on Sunday and banging those out. But Lindsay's the absolute best.
Tell me, you reference your playing career. Tell me about your football background, your football life. What's the Sam Bruckhouse origin story? When did you know you loved this sport, and how'd you get to where you're at now?
Yeah, so I come from a football playing family. My dad played briefly at McNeese State in Lake Charles, Louisiana, where I'm from. I had cousins coach. Most of my family are coaches and teachers. So came up through that. Louisiana high school football, made my way over to Tulane where I played linebacker. Look, I wasn't the best. I was a special teams ace my senior year, but you gain an appreciation for the level of play that occurs at the collegiate level, Division I level down there at Tulane. We had multiple NFL guys that are still there. Dorian Williams of the Buffalo Bills, Patrick Johnson, who you'll see on the Eagles field, Cam Sample on the Bengals, Tajay Spears. I could go on and on. But you gain a true appreciation for the work that you have to put in. I mean, you're basically in class from the hours of 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. Then you are on the field from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Then you're in the weight room from 11 to 12. Then you have real class at that level for the rest, and that's not even including your own film study and your own weight room stuff. And so you really get a level of discipline that's really fun. And it, helps me in my job now, just that discipline, but also understanding the game, understanding what is going on the field.
As somebody who played at that level, I always like to ask the former college guys, and sometimes I feel bad because I'm rubbing it in, but you didn't play during a time where you could get paid, and now these guys are getting paid. And look, I said for years that I thought the NCAA, and still stand on this, was a extremely corrupt organization building a multi-billion-dollar business on the backs of employees that they don't have to pay. I know there are complications with it, and I'm sensitive to all that stuff, but do you like the fact that, college players now are able to basically have the same basic economic rights that every other American has?
I absolutely love it. But, Spence, I'm a little biased. My freshman year, I tore my ACL, tore basically everything in my knee. I was lucky enough to get an internship while I was rehabbing with an NBA agent. I represented guys like Langston Galloway, Tyrus Thomas, Jay Huff, who is now with the Indiana Pacers, was one of our guys. And you gain an appreciation for the other side, for what it's like to be a professional player and having all these responsibilities and having to be compensated for it. Obviously, at the time, I was not compensated. It was not legal. We had guys who would get water bottles handed to them and posted on Instagram, and then all of a sudden would get hit with an NCAA violation that they would have to talk about in all kinds of conferences or councils and stuff like that. It's absolutely ridiculous. I'm very pro NIL as an ex-player and a person who has been in player representation before. I think it is better for the game. I mean, you go look at Utah versus Cincinnati. That's a ranked matchup now. You go look at Texas Tech, what Texas Tech is doing. They've built a brand off the back of NIL. And look, once again, I'm biased. Tulane has one of the best NIL outfits in the G5. We're starting to see teams like that compete as well. SMU, given their NIL outfit, was able to compete at the G5 level, then automatically go compete at the ACC as well. I think it evens the playing field, and I think it makes it a better environment for players to play in, given that, you're risking I mentioned I tore my ACL. There's guys who have massive injuries on a field that cuts their future earnings short. And sometimes it's not even just in football. Sometimes it's your ability to lift stuff. And so that really can affect people's lives. So I am 100% pro NIL. And moreover, the college game, ironically, from the analytical side, is one of the few games where we can actually value a win. When Tulane goes to the Cotton Bowl, we could actually value the marketing dollars that added to the school as a whole. That's not even to consider like the state program or whatever. And so it's one of the few things where we can actually value what the value of a win is at the P5 level, the G5 level, and upset. We've seen programs like Gonzaga in basketball basically build a whole brand off of these collegiate athletes and grow their school as a result. You can't really do that in the NFL where there's 32 teams. It's a monopoly. For the most part, most of the teams are locked into a cap structure and stuff like that. So you're in a situation where you can truly value each player and their contribution on the field, and I'm very glad that teams are outlaying that to players now.
You referenced the Utah-Cincinnati game, and I do want to do mostly pro with you today, but you're an analytical guy, and I just continue to find it really fascinating that most of the advanced metrics really value Utah in a way that the AP doesn't necessarily, and the fact that they do have 2 losses. Yet you look at things like the S&P Plus and the Football Power Index, they're basically telling us S&P Plus has Utah at 6, Football Power Index has Utah at 7, and the CFP committee clearly agrees because while Utah is 17 in the AP, they're 13 in the CFP rankings. I don't know what sort of data you have at your disposal, and I know that you're kind of focused on pro football, but your thoughts on the fact that most of these advanced metrics really value the Utah Utes?
So I think let's just break it down piece by piece. You look at their offense right now, it's not the most explosive offense, but it is an incredibly successful offense. Right now they're sitting right around the top 30 in expected points added per play, but they're very good in success rate. What that means is they're not getting the explosive plays, and we've talked about, Spence, how Devin Dampier is not going to throw it super deep. You're not going to have an extremely active or explosive running game as well. But, I mean, golly. In that Cincinnati game, they are 66th percentile, so not even the top third in expected points added on the day, but they control the game. Massive increase in plays over Cincinnati, control possession, play behind that offensive line, which is extremely analytically valuable. That in our WAR ratings and our player value metrics, they're doing extremely well across the offensive line, particularly with those 2 NFL-level tackles. And they continue to win big. They continue to beat the teams they're supposed to beat pretty badly. And then you play 2 tight games against 2 top 12 rated teams, BYU and Texas Tech. That'll put you at a very high value in these rankings. I think as it pertains now, they are going to be favored in all their remaining games, basically until the Big 12 championship. And as a result, they kind of are. They control their own destiny? Not necessarily, but for the most part, you win out, you're probably in the college football playoff right now.
One more question here, then we'll move over. It also has become very clear. It's really manifested that the Big 12 has 3 good football teams, and then there's a massive gap between 3 and whoever you think is 4. I think a lot of people think it's Cincinnati. But if I asked you to rank, and maybe the data says something here, Texas Tech, BYU, Utah, in order of who you think the best teams are in order, what would you say, Sam?
Yeah, I think if you look at our player value metrics and our actual like monetary valuations of players, you got to go with Texas Tech. I mean, they outlaid the money, and they have the defensive line, offensive line, wide receivers, quarterbacks to make a run for real. They're an immensely physical team, and they're doing it on both sides of the ball. Extremely high havoc rate, extremely efficient offense. I think they're number 1. I'm a little hesitant on BYU. I think that obviously they beat Utah. You got to look at it. And I think they're probably at the same level as at Utah, but you got a rookie quarterback. You're not exactly the most explosive offense of all time, and you're not exactly an excellent defense. I just worry that they don't excel at anything. And then you look at Utah, a quality offense for sure, very successful. They struggle a little bit in stopping the run, but they have an excellent pass stopping defense. I think that is what puts them slightly above BYU in my eyes, but I do think it's Texas Tech, Utah, and then BYU right now.
Last thing, Texas Tech favored by 10.5 over Brigham Young when they do battle coming up in Lubbock on Saturday morning. Who do you like? Do you think Tech wins and covers? Do you think BYU can hang in? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, 10.5 is a huge cover, but given that breakdown I just gave, it makes sense to me, at least analytically. I think when you got guys like David Bailey, like the defensive tackles they have, it's going to be a rough game to overcome for Bear Bachmeier, the rookie quarterback. And as a result, I think it has to be Texas Tech. Look, it's going to be a massively competitive game. BYU scraps it out. So I don't know quite if Texas Tech is going to be able to cover that spread. It's a big one, but I do like Texas Tech on the money line.
All right, Sam. Lindsay tried to make me feel better about my New York football Jets yesterday. And
I tried to do it last week too, Spence.
No, you did, but now we've got new news is they're trading some of their best young players. Sauce Gardner's a Colt. Quinnen Williams is a Cowboy. I know I'm supposed to be excited about the future, but as a Jet fan, that's hard for me to stomach. Do you like what they decided to do prior to the trade deadline?
I like it. I mean, it's a clear decision. It shows clear process. And in the National Football League nowadays, when you're trying to rebuild these teams who have struggled for decades, much to your chagrin, Spence, you got to have a process. We saw it with the Carolina Panthers, who now sit right around 500. Years prior, we saw it with the Detroit Lions. They had primo players, at least in the eyes of the league. They gave them a half of the year to compete. And in terms of expected points added per play allowed, this team's like 28th. You just cannot continue to do that. If you have players that people are going to offer first and second round picks for, I mean, it's premium draft capital. It gives you a long leeway. It gives you options. You can cash those in for players you know are good, or you can use it in the draft. And so I think there's hope in Florham Park right now that there probably wasn't going to be had Sauce and had Q still been on the team basically as the season went on. I mean, like, frankly, the defense can't get much worse. The real question is like, frankly, they weren't that bad in success rate. I think they were about league average in defensive success rate. The question is, can they maintain that? I'm of the mind that they probably can. They kept a lot of key pieces that are a little bit younger, not as highly paid. Jermaine Johnson, the two linebackers, Sherwood and Williams. Will McDonald's had a pretty good year up till now. And then you kind of keep the pieces in the secondary. Brandon Stevens has played well and honestly outperformed what he did in the Ravens. He's played about up to what his contract really is. So you can't expect the defense to get worse. And now you got three first-round picks in the deck and a second-round pick. I think they were good deals. I think they evaluated what their team was this year and thought that they could still make, progress as a team moving forward without those two guys. And I'm inclined to agree. I think you really look at the metrics all around, and I think it was a pretty sound decision, and it gives them a little bit of leeway for the next 2 years to go after a quarterback, go after positions of need, so forth and so on.
I think Lindsay made a good point yesterday about the Colts side of this. Maybe you saw this coming with the Colts. I certainly didn't. But ultimately they're in the mix, and they decide to, push their chips into the center of the table. And oftentimes in pro football, contending teams that might be a piece or two away decide to sit on their hands, but the Colts didn't. What do you like about this from their perspective?
If you're just sheerly looking at the metrics that matter, Spence, right now they are first in point differential, and it's not particularly close. Number 2 is the Chiefs. As a result, they have a lot of wins. You look at even Daniel Jones, what he's doing in terms of his efficiency, his success rate, and how he's contributing in both the running and the passing game. He's doing extremely well. It just feels, and look, I'm an analytical guy. I get paid to do data science, but it just doesn't feel correct with Daniel Jones right now, and I think everyone's waiting for the shoe to drop. They go and play a Steelers team, which frankly is average. They've been average for years, and they have an aging quarterback. They have an aging secondary, and you see it kind of explode. I'm not going to be the guy who's going to say that this is the way it's going to be for the rest of the year. And do I think Sauce Gardner is a great addition? Yes. He's going to lock down that defense. I think they recognize that they're going to have to play a little bit more defensive game and get some of the heat that's going to come as the pressure mounts and mounts and mounts into the playoffs off of Daniel Jones using that defense, which has an excellent front. And I think they're going to really try to smother teams now, both with an excellent front and a staggering back seven, particularly when Charvarius Ward comes back. But I just don't know. When you build through the trenches, it ends up good. They have a lot of good pass catchers, including Tyler Warren, the standout rookie. Jonathan Taylor is a potential Offensive Player of the Year candidate. But it just comes down to, do you believe in Danny Dimes? You've seen it before where he kind of stumbles in the second half of the season. This really feels to me like that Titan season from a long ago when Kerry Collins came in. I believe they had Vince Young on the team or something like that. All of a sudden they're sitting at 8-1 or something like that, and it kind of broke apart at the end of the year. I think they are who they are, and thus far with this similar roster, sans Danny Jones, it's been a 500 or slightly above 500 staggering into the playoff team. I think we're going to see a little regression to that just based off what we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years. But all the metrics say they're for real. So when it's data science, Sam, the metrics are for real. They're a real team. Go and get you Sauce Gardner. Go win a Super Bowl. Just the general feel of it, I don't really love right now.
Before we move off the trade deadline, I'll just ask you, generally speaking, what other deals did you like? What other deals left you scratching your head?
I really liked the Jalen Phillips move by the Eagles. You look at that defense right now, and it is heralded as one of the best defenses in the league. The metrics just aren't there. Right now, they're kind of struggling against the run. They have a lot of injuries, and they haven't held up their end of the bargain with regards to the offense versus the defense. Last year, this was a completely defensively led team. They want to go out there and play nickel and not have to utilize a ton of linebackers and heavy sets. They want to go out there and play light boxes and dominate. Jalen Phillips right now is performing at a Pro Bowl level, a true impact starter for a pretty rough Dolphins defense. The injuries are a question mark, but I think utilizing a third-round pick where the Eagles moved from the 10th most draft capital to the 11th most draft capital is not going to hurt you. I think that was an excellent outlay of capital for a position of need that likely will affect the bottom line on defense.
So we'll have Thursday Night Football on the station tonight, about 90 minutes or so away from an old school NFL rivalry, but two teams really moving in the same direction. Obviously, Denver's defense is elite, and Bo Nix and Sean Payton have proven that partnership is something that looks like it'll be fruitful for quite some time. We got a lot of Broncos fans in the market, and we're close to Vegas too. We got a lot of Raiders fans in the market. Can the Raiders make this interesting? Does it feel like it's going to be one-sided? Obviously, it'll be tough for them to move the football. What do you think we're going to see tonight?
The man to watch to understand how this game is going to go is Talanoa Hufanga. Right now, he is the best player at his position across positions, meaning the way he is playing at safety is not only at a certifiable all-pro level, but he's like literally performing at the top of what we've seen safeties do. He's being used in the pass rush. He's being used as basically a linebacker in run defense. He's being used in coverage. The man is doing a lot for this Broncos Vance Joseph coach defense. And if he is making impact plays against Geno Smith and he's causing problems that do not allow the ball to get to Brock Bowers and the wide receivers, I think this is game, set, match. For the Broncos. I think they're going to overpower him with defense. Bo Nix has been limiting mistakes. We've talked about it over and over. His sack percentage is back to extremely low, and it's just up to Bo Nix not to make kind of the Auburn Bo Nix plays, to be Oregon Bo Nix. And so I think if Talanoa Hufanga is utilized correctly, they're unable to get targets to Brock Bowers, and Bo Nix continues playing with a level of at least average consistency, or at least not negative consistency, this is probably going to chalk up to be a Broncos victory.
If Vegas is able to move the ball, how do they do that? Will they be able to, find, obviously Ashton Jeanty is a really promising young rookie. He's from our region, of course, playing at Boise State. As you know, I'm a Jets fan. I know the Geno Smith experience can be wild. If Vegas is able to move the football, how do they do it?
Yeah, I think you look at what Chip Kelly has done all over his career, and it's innovate. Obviously, their best weapon is Brock Bowers. They have Ashton Jeanty as well. Can we see the Geno of old? Perhaps. We haven't seen it this year. So I'd like to see something that we've kind of seen a trend of in the last couple of weeks, which is teams going heavy, adding multiple tight ends, maybe an extra offensive line to try to force that Broncos defense to bring Hufanga in the box or to add another linebacker and then try to force a bad matchup with Brock Bowers. Unfortunately for them, they're all pros, Pro Bowl, impact starter level performers all across this Broncos defense. So it will be tough. There's a reason why the Broncos have an extremely successful record over the past 2 years. There's a reason why they're one of the top-ranked defenses for the past 2 years. But I'd like to see them utilize that because the best offenses in the leagues and the standout offenses that have kind of jumped out at us, the Colts, the Seahawks, that's how they've been doing it this year despite struggles in the run game from the Seahawks, despite a question mark at quarterback early for the Colts. So I want to see if they can go heavy. You know, they have bodies at the tight end position that they trust. They have extra offensive linemen that they trust. I want to see if that can spring Bowers loose in the pass game in particular and perhaps open up the run as a result as well.
Before I say you loose, I talked to Lindsay about this yesterday as well. We like to track our local players and you hope that they succeed and do well. And, you know, after the Micah Parsons trade, I think a lot of people around here are excited for Jordan Love and what the Packers could essentially turn into. My question is simple. I'm sure the response is not. Are they good at football? I cannot figure them out.
I think Jordan Love is good at football. I think the problem right now, from a personnel perspective, is inconsistency at offensive line. And I think when you really dig deep into our Sumer scores, we don't really have a guy in the top third of offensive linemen performing on that offensive line right now. And this is an offense that wants to be a power offense. They want to run play action. They want to get Josh Jacobs off. It's very rare in analytics that we are able to separate the offensive line and the running back. This is one of the rare occasions where our tracking technology has identified that Josh Jacobs is actually doing a good job. The offensive line is really struggling. I think the key right now is that Matt LaFleur is struggling to find an identity for this offense. I talked about it over there in Green Bay in the Wisconsin radio market, but they kind of confirmed what the analytics were seeing with their eye test, that they're kind of the median right now and under center. They're not doing really well in the run game. They can't figure that out under center. They're running a lot of play action, but it's not going extremely well. However, their passing offense is still really good. Their pass rate over expected is pretty low. They're running the ball quite a lot in pass situations. I think that their identity should be just putting the ball in Jordan Love's hands, letting it fly the way that he did at Utah State. I think it's finally time to take the chains off and see if Jordan Love can be a true franchise quarterback in a drop-back offense. That's what I think their identity should be. Perhaps they'll find another one, but it'll be on the back of Jordan Love, and it'll be really tightly correlated with the progression of this offensive line.
Sam, tell us about Sumer Brain and then where everybody can go find your work.
Yeah, check us out, Sumer Brain. It's an excellent tool. I use it every day. In fact, me and one of our interns were using it today to figure out what EPA loss occurs on pressures. So Jonathan Grenard was the guy we were looking at. We were going in asking, when Jonathan Grenard gets a pressure, what is the impact of the play in terms of expected points added? That's data you literally can't get anywhere else for free. So go check it out, sumersports.com/SumerBrain, and check us out on sumersports.com. We'll be writing an all-pro list mid-season using our Sumer scores. It'll be really interesting to see who comes out on top. I'll be working on that on Monday. It'll be out midweek.
Great stuff, Sam. Enjoy the games this weekend. We'll get you back on next week.
Thank you very much.
Sam Bruckhouse, Sumer Sports. Man, these Sumer Sports people are just a fountain of information. Good stuff there. Thursday Night Football comes your way tonight. It will be right after we say goodnight between the Broncos and the Raiders. All right, football weekend starts right now. How was your weekend last weekend if you had YouTube TV? Probably sad, despondent, depressing. Well, good news, 801-424-DISH. You can make the switch, and you actually have a better setup. Save money with internet as well. Hello, Ryan from the Dish Pros. How are you?
Great. Thanks so much. You know, I'm super excited about this new promotion. Guys, Dish just made it simple and clean, and they got rid of the additional fees. So when I quote a price, that's just the price. And this makes it so much nicer, and the price is guaranteed not to change. $89 a month. You're going to set up like 170 channels. You get all the channels you need. And, guys, you're dialed in, and you can watch ESPN. You can watch all the football games. You can have the biggest DVR out there where auto records locals, auto records your favorite team's games for you. We'll get you set up and installed for free, throwing dinner at JCW's, throwing some movie channels on top of that. Guys, this is the thing. Listen, if you've got cable or DirecTV, you really got to call because we're probably $50 more a month cheaper than what you're currently paying. And if you got YouTube TV, well, it's the same price, but they're going to raise their price, and you're going to be stuck paying a higher price. You can pay the same price and have ESPN and to go from movie channels. Call us up today. Let us take care of you. We've got great internet options. starting at 20 to 50 bucks a month. If you've got problems through internet, we are the place to call. We've done all the footwork. We've got all the internet providers. Even if you have fiber, we have the solutions. If you're unhappy, simple, call us 424-DISH, 801-424-DISH.
Okay, there he is, Ryan from the Dish Professionals. We'll do a little sports court coming up on the other side of a quick break. 5 o'clock hour tonight will be all college football. As it's a massive weekend ahead, BYU, Texas Tech, all the eyes of the college football country down in Lubbock as game day will be there. It's a bye week for the Utes. And then remember, we'll say goodnight at 6 and send you over to coverage of Thursday Night Football between the Broncos and the Raiders. So a lot to do the rest of the way on a Thursday show. Keep it right here on ESPN 700. It is Sports Court time. We do it every Thursday, right about now, with our good friends Garrett and Preston Handy from the law firm of Handy and Handy. Gentlemen, happy Thursday. How are we doing?
Hey, good, Spence. Just Garrett today, but good to be with you.
Oh, well, now I'm in a better mood. Okay, so just me and Garrett hanging out today, which is
just us.
Preston, we love you, buddy. All right, the update on the MJ NASCAR saga. There's some new news on a story we've been covering. What's going on here?
It is. We're limping towards trial, but things are starting to come into focus. We've talked about this a few times recently, but this is, of course, this antitrust case that Michael Jordan and Denny Hamlin, these two teams, Front Row and Michael Jordan's team, they brought against NASCAR, saying that the way that NASCAR hands out these charters, that it's anti-competitive, right? And so this is a big ruling that came down this week. I mean, it's not going to end the case, but it's a summary judgment ruling. So essentially the judge made a decision on kind of an important issue and found that really that the market for NASCAR is controlled by NASCAR. For stock car racing, I guess I should say, is controlled by NASCAR. And that's one of the things that they have to decide in an antitrust case, is just that the defendant really has control over the market. And what NASCAR tried to argue, and the judge wasn't buying it, but they're saying, hey, well, what about Formula One and IndyCar racing? I mean, we don't control that. And I think the judge is saying, well, obviously you don't control that. This is just about NASCAR and stock car racing. So it narrows some issues, kind of gets over that. I mean, basically establishes that they have control over the marketplace and that's really defined. And so now the issue at trial just gets narrowed in on, okay, so NASCAR, they've got this monopoly, but have they used that in a way that's anti-competitive and used it in a way that has harmed the teams? So, again, kind of narrowing the issues. This could be something that pushes the parties towards a settlement, possibly, or, like I said, just narrows the issues for trial that's scheduled in December.
I know when the House settlement came down, there was a lot of, think pieces, folks discussing the potential that Title IX could be an issue moving forward. And it looks like the appeal that I have in front of me that you sent over is arguing that Title IX has been violated by these payments. Unpack this for us. This is an interesting angle here.
It is. So this is an appeal from some Division I athletes from rowing, volleyball, swimming, and diving, and they're coming in with this appeal, which would essentially reverse the settlement. Of course, the big House $2.6 billion House settlement that we've talked about over the last really few years, that it violates Title IX. And if you remember, if we go back when the settlement was approved by Judge Wilkins, there were a few different instances where certain objectors came forward. These were student-athlete objectors, again, from these types of sports, and came forward and said that this violates Title IX. That was one of their arguments. And, again, we've talked about Title IX a lot, but basically what that does is prohibits sex-based discrimination in education programs that get federal funding. And so if you look at the numbers, I mean, football and men's basketball are going to get 90% of the $2.6 billion settlement. So, again, those issues were brought before Judge Wilkins when the settlement was finally approved. And Judge Wilkins, she had a lot of discretion in making that decision, but the standard that she had to apply was that the settlement was fair, reasonable, and adequate. So, in some ways, I think an appeals court could say, hey, Judge Wilkins did consider whether or not this violated Title IX and found that it didn't, that on balance, this was the right thing that, to do for college sports and was fair and adequate. The issue could come up later on down the road, I think might be more appropriate. Once that money gets dispersed to the schools and they start doling out the money, right? I mean, for example, you could see a swimming athlete at the University of Utah claim that the way that the athletic department has distributed that money violates Title IX. So we could see kind of downstream more claims come forward, but for now it's another just another bump in the road towards finally concluding this House settlement.
The mouth of the South is in the news. I was unaware of this. James Carville well-known political pundit, was on, I think, Bill Clinton's staff. He's saying he's going to burn his LSU diplomas and threatening legal action over Jeff Landry's comments on Scott Woodward. What's going on here?
Yeah, he said he was going to burn all of his LSU gear, both of my diplomas, and both of my daughter's diplomas. I don't know if anybody's checked with his daughters about that. But basically this all revolves around Brian Kelly's firing and the first-term governor there, Jeff Landry, inserting himself into this process where he held a press conference and announced that, with some criticism, that Scott Woodward, who was the athletic director, would not be leading the search for Kelly's replacement. And so, I'm struggling here to follow James Carville's legal argument here for what he's got. This is kind of what he said. He said, I believe, and he said he's engaged the services of a law firm. Apparently, this might be a prominent law firm in Louisiana. He says that Governor Landry libeled our athletic director, so this is Woodward, when he erroneously talked about Jimbo Fisher's buyout at Texas A&M, and I believe we have a case for actual malice. If we can get discovery, I think we can prove that. It's reputational damage that's been done to the university. It's incalculable. And he said he's not going to be passive in the struggle at all. So, and then some comments about, why would any coach ever come here now? You've got Jeff Landry coming on saying, hey, taxpayers are potentially on the hook for this, for Brian Kelly's huge buyout, and we're not going to let that happen again with the next coach. So anyway, James Carville, I don't know if this is more just, punditry and, being a talking head, which is what he's good at on cable news, or if this is, really going to have any legs to it. We'll see.
This next story is really interesting. Now, it's not a accurate parallel to talk about how the Jazz and the Mammoth use the Delta Center because they're owned by the same entity, the Smith Entertainment Group. But the Mavericks and the Stars down in Dallas do share an arena, and it looks like they're at odds here. And I'm not exactly sure why, but it's a pretty rare thing to see this in the realm of professional sports. What's going on here, Garrett?
Well, it is rare because you got two teams that essentially live in the same house, more or less, right, and need to share that facility. This is the American Airlines Center, but you bring up a good point about the Jazz and the Mammoth, and of course with shared ownership, which we see all over sports, but you're not really usually going to see this kind of an issue. The Mavs and the Stars have separate ownership, and they have a joint operating agreement to manage the American Airlines Center. So the arena is owned by the city of Dallas, but since 2001, both the teams have managed the arena together under this, it's called a center operating company. So they set up a company that runs the arena, that leases out the space and time and schedule and all those things, and then also deals with any capital improvements or investments into the arena. And so there's a contract that both of the teams have to abide by for American Airlines Center to operate. And what the Mavericks are saying is they're saying that the Stars have breached the contract. Apparently the contract requires that the teams maintain their headquarters in Dallas, and I guess the Stars have moved out to Frisco. And then the other thing they say is that the Stars haven't contributed, right, to certain investments and maintenance and different things for the arena. So they're trying to, the Stars are calling this a hostile takeover. They're saying, well, wait a minute, you're just, you guys are just trying to get us out of this so you can take over the arena by yourself. So I think it's a really interesting situation because this is a city-owned arena. And so, and really we're just talking about a joint operating agreement to use the facility. So, we'll see where this one goes as well. Interesting case, though.
A few weeks back, the NBA world was rocked with the gambling current situation, and Adam Silver has an issue on his hands. Chauncey Billups, Terry Rozier, and then former player and coach Damon Jones, who is kind of like LeBron James' hype man. He's pled not guilty in a pair of alleged gambling scheme cases. Give us an update here, Garrett.
Yeah, Damon Jones, if you remember, he's one of the guys that's named in both cases because there's two separate two separate cases that are being brought, these federal cases. One is a sports betting case, right, with the games, and, Terry Rozier is involved in that one. The other one is the high-stakes poker games that's backed by the mafia that, you've got Chauncey Billups engaged in. So Damon Jones gets charged in both. He's had his arraignment. He's pled not guilty, put up a $200,000 bond that was secured by his parents' home. I think one of the interesting details that came out to me, a federal public defender has been appointed for him. And then also with his parents' home securing the bond, it makes me think he apparently, or his assets have been frozen because of this, but didn't make a lot of money playing poker and rigging sports betting games.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
So anyway, just one little, this just is, it's pled not guilty, and we're going to start seeing these different arraignments as we go forward.
I'm going to throw something at you and catch you off guard a little bit, Garrett, but you're a smart guy, so I'm sure you can roll with it. So this is just breaking, okay? Antonio Brown, who was an incredibly productive wide receiver in Pittsburgh mainly, but ended his career in Tampa. He has been arrested on attempted murder charges stemming from a shooting after a celebrity boxing event in Miami, and he was actually extradited from Dubai. He was taken into custody by U.S. Marshals in Dubai. So I'm sure you'll dig in, and we'll probably go a little bit deeper next week. But when it comes to, this type of dynamic where a suspect is abroad and overseas, how does this kind of work? Because he's not necessarily the most intelligent young man. He's been posting a ton on social media like, hey, I'm in Dubai. So probably not the smartest move. But, again, I don't want to catch you off guard, but how does this type of stuff work when a suspect is abroad and U.S. Marshals take him into custody and extradite him back to the city where he's being charged?
Yeah, I'm curious who the victim is in this, and I wonder how much of this, Spence, and I'm just again kind of speculating here because I don't know I guess the ins and the outs of extradition, but I think a lot of this is just a diplomatic thing and the closeness with potentially the United States and Dubai on how they want to handle where a U.S. citizen has committed a crime abroad. And I think a lot of times, and we saw this a little bit with, for example, like Brittany Griner, right, who's, that didn't happen. I'm sure the U.S. would have loved to, at the beginning of that, have her extradited, and let's try her in the United States. I think there's an interest in, the government, if they can, bringing American citizens home for trial.
All right, Garrett, I appreciate it.
I'm sure we'll talk about it next week.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sorry for catching you off guard there. But
no problem.
Before I set you loose, for any of our listeners who have legal questions, how can they get a hold of you over at Handy and Handy?
Yeah, give us a call. Happy to talk to you about any of your legal questions, especially in the area of personal injury. You can reach us at 801-264-6677 or go to our website, handylawutah.com.
Thank you, my friend. Have a great weekend. We'll chat next week. And, of course, as always, even though it's a bye week, Garrett, we'll say go Utes.
Go Utes. Thanks, Spence.
All right, Garrett Handy from the law firm of Handy and Handy. Great guys. Any legal questions, give them a call. Happy to give you some advice if you find yourself in a sticky spot. Before we catch a break to get to the 5 o'clock hour of this show, how was your football consumption last weekend? Well, if you had YouTube TV, you were certainly very limited. There's time to make the switch before football gets going this weekend, but you got to call now. It's the Dish Professionals at 801-424-DISH, and if you think you're paying too much for internet, you are. What's going on, Ryan?
Spence, thanks so much. This is pretty awful for your YouTube TV subscriber not having access to ESPN, Disney's, all that. So listen, you don't want to stick around with this. And they're doing a rate increase, right? Bills going up. Right now, you can get set up with Dish, $89 a month, and there's no additional DVR fees or anything. That's the set price. You'll get all the ESPNs. You can get to watch all the games. Call us up. Take advantage of this. You get the biggest DVR out there. Auto hops and auto records for you your games. Plus, you also throw on movie channels. We've got some fantastic offers right now where you get Showtime, Paramount Plus, Stars, and even the Dish Movie Pack free for 3 or 4 months. Call us and take advantage of the deals. Get the upgrade. Get the free equipment. Get the price guarantee. That's the cool thing. And save a bunch of money. And get your program so you can watch all your games. Call us now, 424-DISH. It's 801-424-DISH.
All right, there he is, Ryan from the Dish Professionals. 3 hours down, 1 hour to go. Don't forget, right after we say goodnight, we will send you over to coverage of Thursday Night Football between the Broncos and the Raiders. But we'll do some college football prior to that. About an hour left in the program on a Thursday afternoon, so keep it right here on ESPN 700. All right, here we go. Drive at 5 time, Thursday afternoon style. It is about 2 minutes past the hour of 5 o'clock. It was a chilly, rainy morning here across the Wasatch Front. Warmed up a little bit this afternoon. It settled in at about 54 degrees, and sun is shining a little bit outside. And as it is every single day, it's good to have you along for the ride. Decent weekend of weather. It's going to warm back up at the start of next week into the 60s, potentially Monday and Tuesday. Happy Thursday to you. The NFL returns tonight. Week 10 of the NFL gets rolling with a little Broncos-Raiders action. And we will have that game for you on this radio station after we say goodnight just after 6 o'clock. The Denver Broncos are playing excellent football right now, and they are a 9-point favorite over their rival, the Vegas Raiders. This game, of course, is in Denver. So stay tuned at let's take care of the sponsor. It's not just Mile High. It's Empower Field at Mile High in Denver, Colorado. So stay tuned. After we say goodnight, you're going to hear a little Thursday Night Football on the program. Of course, a lot of attention on the show today and throughout the week on a massive, massive weekend in the Big 12 and in college football. Utah is on a bye. The Idle Utes were ranked 13th in the college football playoff rankings, the first iteration being released on Tuesday evening. But BYU potentially with one of the biggest games in program history. I don't think that's hyperbolic. I don't think it's a hot take. I think it's absolutely for real as BYU heads to Lubbock to take on Texas Tech. Don't forget, that is a 10 a.m. kick. Now, College Game Day is going to be down there, so the eyes of the college football world on the Big 12 and in Lubbock, and BYU continues to find themselves as a 10-point underdog on the road. Texas Tech heavily favored. Of course, these two teams in the top 10. I do believe that the winner of this football game has paved its way to the Big 12 championship game. It's probably a little bit too early to say the winner of the football game has paved its way to the college football playoff, but I do believe the winner of this game will go to the Big 12 championship game with an opportunity to advance to the college football playoff. Of course, the expanded edition with 12 teams now. BYU has never been in the college football playoff. Neither is Utah. Of course, Utah comes in at number 13 with the opportunity still to maybe find its way into the Big 12 championship game. But as a result of being a lot higher than most people believed for the first iteration of the CFP rankings, there is a pathway for Utah to qualify as an at-large. These advanced metrics just continue to really believe Utah is one of the top 6 or 7 teams in the country. I wondered if the committee was going to echo that sentiment, and they did, as Utah is 17 in the AP, but a full 4-spot jump juxtaposed to the College Football Playoff Committee's opinion, and they find themselves at 13. Utah and Iowa, the two biggest movers as it pertains to what the CFP committee values this year, as they were able to make the jump. So, massive game coming up, massive weekend in college football and in the Big 12. And for BYU side of things, as we've kind of discussed, the 7th-ranked team in the CFP rankings, Texas Tech, is at 8. And when it comes to what the committee is telling us as far as what they value, namely, we can use Texas as an example. Now, Texas is a 2-loss team. They're 7-2, but they come in at number 11, just behind Notre Dame, just ahead of Oklahoma. In the CFP rankings, of course, they have a head-to-head win over Oklahoma. Texas has won 4 straight football games, most recently a win over a top 10 team in Vanderbilt. But their 2 losses, the Florida loss, obviously not a great look. But they opened the season at the Horseshoe, losing to Ohio State in a very close game. Now, the committee and most people believe Ohio State is the best team in college football. But one of the things the committee referenced is they weren't going to penalize teams for what is being characterized as good losses. I don't love the term, but I understand the dynamic. And it's one of the reasons, even though Texas has 2 losses, they're basically knocking on the door in the top 10. And Texas has an opportunity to either shut people up who believe they're fraudulent or back people up who believe they're legit, because they got Georgia coming up this weekend, and that's in the Grove. That's a road game. They've got Arkansas at home, and then they'll close out with Texas A&M at home. So they have 2 teams in the top 5 left on their schedule, but they really are not penalized for that Ohio State loss. Hence where we find Utah, right? So because the committee is telling us Texas Tech and BYU are top 8 teams in the country, Utah is not necessarily being penalized on an overt level for losing two teams that are in the top 8. Hence the number 13 ranking up 4 spots compared to where the AP believes they live. And the other thing, last year it was pretty clear early on that the committee a year ago and the formula that they decided to enact to rank these teams was very low on the Big 12. And some of that certainly was founded in evidence. But it felt very apparent very early on that the only team in the Big 12 that would make the CFP a year ago was the team that won the league. And that's not the message they're sending this year. I do think 3 teams is a little bit pie in the sky. We're going to talk to Kyle Bonagura about that. But for BYU's sake, the only thing they really need to avoid this weekend is getting stomped, right? Like if they go down to Texas Tech and Tech kicks a game-winning field goal with 15, 20 seconds left on the clock. Now, this is also dependent on what other teams do coming up this weekend. Oregon has a big game coming up, and Oregon is sitting right at 9, right behind both Tech and BYU. So we can't be as reductive as to focus on just one game. Oregon is on the road at Iowa, and Iowa is the 20th ranked team in the country. And the committee is telling us that they do not value Oregon the same way the AP or the coaches poll do. Oregon, their only loss on the season is to the team that the CFP is telling us is a top 2 team in the country, and that's Indiana. Now, that was at Autzen. They did beat Penn State in Penn State's building, and at the time we thought that would be a good win, but ultimately Penn State is completely combusted, and their head coach is looking for a job. So Oregon is kind of in need of a little bit of a statement, and they will have an opportunity to make a statement the rest of the way because they have 3 games left against teams that are top 23 teams as of now. They're at Iowa on Saturday. They get Minnesota at home. Then they get USC at home. USC in the top 20. Washington jumps into the top 25. They're at 23. And Oregon closes the season up there in Seattle at Washington. So, if Oregon is able to make a statement coming up this weekend and beat Iowa pretty good, then we could see some movement that would affect BYU. But in a vacuum, if BYU goes down to Lubbock and they make it a fair fight, they throw punches with a team that a lot of metrics believe is a top 5 team in the country, we could see something as benign as just a flip, right? Like Tech up to 7 and BYU down to 8. A lot of this, like I said, contingent upon some of the results that will take place coming up this weekend because there are upsets every weekend in the sport. It's not as easy to say, well, if all the favorites win, then this or that will happen. What will happen coming up, let's say if Texas gets stomped by Georgia, because when you look at it, Utah is right behind Texas in the standings. Utah is at 13. You have to hope that you get a little help coming up this weekend from the teams that are right ahead of you. And maybe we see some upsets and, maybe, coming up again after the bye week, it is Texas, Georgia. Georgia has Mississippi State coming up this weekend. It'll be Texas, Georgia a week from now because Texas is on a bye this week. Can you get a little help from some teams that are right in front of you and some upsets potentially from some teams that would allow you to move up? Because obviously if Utah can incrementally move up, then their chances of an at-large bid will continue to kind of inflate. Now, both the chances of Utah qualifying for the Big 12 championship or getting into the CFP as an at-large, they're not great percentages. Like the numbers are not on Utah's side. Now, Utah will be favored in every game they play the rest of the way. But Utah has been favored in every game they've played so far. Of course, the only 2 stubbing of the toe situations is Texas Tech here at home and then BYU down in Provo. But very much alive. As far as the college football bubble watch, some games to kind of watch out for coming up this weekend. We'll kind of let you know. Kyle Bonagura is going to stop by. But the other thing that really is kind of manifested certainly is the Big 12, not unlike the Big 10 or the SEC, is a bit top-heavy. But the Big 10, top-heavy with Ohio State and Indiana. The SEC, probably top-heavy this year. I'll say A&M, Bama, Georgia. You can throw Ole Miss in there if you like. And then the Big 12, there are 3 what I would perceive to be very elite teams, and then a massive gap between 3 and 4. I think most people believe Cincinnati is the 4th best team in the Big 12. I mean, we saw Utah just embarrass them, undress them last weekend here. So BYU, Texas Tech, Utah, in whatever order you believe Certain metrics have Tech as the best team in the Big 12. Certain metrics have BYU as the best team in the Big 12. And certain metrics have Utah as the best team in the Big 12. But it is clearly those three and everybody else.